Couple Rose Bowls there. Wow! Wow, 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 wow. Whoo! For those who thought the SEC was going to run away with the sport, hang on. We might have a battle being waged. Maybe the Big Ten is not as complacent as many of us had thought. Welcome to the Voice of College Football on a beautiful, beautiful, at least here in the northeast portion of our fine country on this Thursday afternoon. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you all being here. As we say it all the time, breaking news. Look down through the years. Breaking news, big news in college football, whether that's the latest right now or 1 year ago at this time. Think about it. 1 year ago at this time, Oklahoma, Texas to the SEC. Right about this time, that grenade was tossed. Bomb dropped. Here's another one, possibly. But if it's out there now, you got to think it's there and it means something and it's substantiated to a certain extent. All right. We will get to my thoughts in just a second, but I have certainly sent the link out to a number of key contributors, including Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football. We'll bring Tony in from his car. We hope he's driving safely. And if you have yet to join Tony, whether it be on Last Word on College Football or for a number of our discussions here, Tony is a definite and always constant go-to regarding major issues and events in college football. Tony, how are we doing today? Tony, can you hear me? Hopefully Tony's coming through. Tony, can you hear me? Apparently not. I'm sorry, Tony. We got you for a split second, your audio, and then you cut out. No, we can't hear you. All right. Tony will try back. I let Tony know. Make sure you're safe, and we'll take it from there. Okay. We will, of course, get you your comments and questions. First, my thoughts. So let's get it started here. USC, UCLA reported to the Big Ten starting in, I saw a 2024 report on ESPN. I saw a 2023 report online. I want to credit those reporters. I don't know who exactly broke the story. I saw a couple of tweets that were sent my direction, courtesy DM. I was not familiar with the reporter. However, when we come across that information, I always want to credit the source. So we will do that. I'm looking at ESPN right now. There's really no information on the ESPN story, courtesy Heather Dinich right now. Briefly, USC and UCLA, two of the Pac-12's flagship programs, are considering leaving the conference for the Big Ten as early as 2024. Source confirmed to ESPN. There is still a formal notification process as the two schools have to let the Pac-12 know their intentions to leave. USC and UCLA also have to formally apply to the Big Ten. According to a source, that process is underway. The San Jose Mercury News first reported the news. Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff was not immediately available for comment. So that's according to ESPN. All right, let's dig into this. SEC goes to Oklahoma and Texas. Actually, to be technically correct, Oklahoma and Texas approached the SEC. And of course, the SEC said, heck yeah, let's take you on. Let's go with 16 teams and dominate the sport. A lot of rumblings across America, both unfounded and founded through the rest of the summer and up until this point, about what the Big Ten in particular would do, because the Big Ten is the one that has the clout, the money, the resources to challenge the SEC. What would the Big Ten do about it? Well, we had this flimsy alliance between the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the ACC. Well, we see how flimsy that alliance is, because you're not going to poach teams from another conference if you've got this strong alliance of foundational truths and philosophies that align in academic priorities and such. Okay. As I stated off the top, the SEC, for those of us who have thought, many, and it's understandable that the SEC dominates the sport, you're paying too much attention to what happens on the field, and that's ultimately why we're here, to watch what happens on the field, and the results determine the fan interest and determine the fans' perspective on who rules the sport. Well, if you're watching the games in January, yes, the SEC does rule the sport. If you're looking at revenue, if you're looking at TV ratings, which generate the revenue more than anything else, if you're looking at rear ends in the seats, well, the SEC is right there with the Big Ten, or the Big Ten is right there with the SEC. So the Big Ten is clearly right there with the SEC, and has been in all other aspects, except for being able to challenge at the very highest levels for the most part on the field. But in terms of fan interest, that again is reflected by the number of people in the seats at places like Happy Valley, the Horseshoe, the Big House, Madison, Wisconsin, and so forth, Kinnick Stadium, full houses in the Big Ten. The attendance figures challenge the SEC. The revenue challenges the SEC. And actually, in the most two recent football seasons, the Big Ten exceeded the SEC. Oklahoma, Texas enter the SEC, and the SEC, those revenue projections have skyrocketed for the SEC based on the added pull of those two powerhouses. Now you enter USC and UCLA, and the Big Ten, for a sport that has been geographically stretched, this has now busted the sport geographically, if in fact USC and UCLA join the Big Ten. And it's underway. It's going to happen. We are 95% sure. I am 95% sure it's going to happen. If it's reached the stage of application and review, there you are, USC, UCLA. And it's funny that was the discussion last summer. Does the Big Ten go after USC, UCLA? Whoever started that discussion, they may have just been speaking out of there or talking out of the top of their head, or they may have known something. But hey, after what happened last summer and what we've seen in the past 10 to 12 years in regards to expansion, I have never ruled anything out. I appreciate everybody being here. I will drop the link of this stream to take your calls via StreamYard. So I will put this in the chat. And anyone who would like to join, one new rule with our new call-in process through StreamYard. When you go into the backstage area, and before I bring you on, please leave in the chat your name and either where you're calling from or who you are a fan of. We don't need your address. Jim from Kansas City, that would suffice. So again, your name, please. And if you would like to leave, whether you're a fan of a particular team or where you're calling from, there is the StreamYard link. You can grab that link and join us right here at the Voice of College Football and discuss USC, UCLA. There are so many fascinating facets to this, joining the Big Ten. Basically, as was witnessed by the addition of especially Rutgers and Maryland to the Big Ten, Nebraska was a counter to keep up with the SEC on the field, and obviously brings a very loyal and large fan base. But the Maryland Rutgers, that was a financial move for the Big Ten. That was a financial move looking at cable markets. Now, keep in mind that academics and money are the two factors that pretty much rule all of this. And as long as the Big Ten can fashion itself to acquire universities that meet its academic standards, and it works financially, which USC and UCLA clearly are of that ilk, there you go. As noted, please leave your name and either where you're calling from or who you root for in the chat before we bring you on. And I only say that because our first caller, I'm waiting for them to please do that. All right. Perfect. I believe we've got a loyal viewer and caller on the line. Let's get right to it. Hello, Christopher.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Appreciate you being here. Doing just fine.
Okay.
I guess you've heard the big news.
Well, just barely. I mean, you just barely announced it. So I guess if that's what I don't have an objection to any of it really, Mark, but is somebody really looking at the wider picture of it? Do they I mean, those are two good additions. I understand that, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, and I put it in the chat already, but I would think a better fit would be Colorado because they have a natural rivalry with Nebraska. I mean, do they even weigh these things into consideration, or is it just, well, who are the best two teams in the Pac-12? Well, it looks like UCLA and you know, which is probably true. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but how come they don't look at things at a broader perspective? Kind of like what I was telling you before. It's like you can say that those are the better, additions, sure, and have no question about it, I guess, but you don't think that Colorado wouldn't be a better fit to the Big Ten, or am I nuts?
No, you're not nuts. You are not nuts, Christopher. And anytime I have pushed back on this conversation, it has nothing to do with your perspective just being a different perspective. You're thinking about tradition. You're thinking about the football on the field. You're thinking about geography. All of that has been discarded. All of that has been completely discarded based on what I consider two things. One would be, first and foremost, above anything else, money. Number two, especially with a conference like the Big Ten and to another extent the ACC and the Pac-12, they are trying to uphold certain academic standards. So as long as those universities meet their academic standards and they can make them a ton of money, those are the two things that come along and they are good to go. The geography has been blown to smithereens.
Well, I'm not even saying necessarily that. I mean, we live in an era where I don't know that the geography really, they can work through that, I guess, but I just don't understand. It's like, to me, based on what little I know, because I'll be the first to admit, Mark, I'm a novice at all this. I mean, you know, 100, you said 100 or 1,000 or whatever. I understand that. I'm not a professional. I'm just an amateur, but my ideas are just, they're just suggestions, but here's the other suggestion I had. I don't know if I was able to share that with you before because we got kind of cut off the last time, but I was thinking Notre Dame would make a good fit to the Big Ten if they wanted to be there.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then you would still have another spot available, I think, because if Penn State and West Virginia were included to the Atlantic Coast Conference, which is another suggestion I have, Penn State and West Virginia to the Atlantic Coast. And so they would create another opening, which you could either fill with Cincinnati or, which I don't really think Cincinnati is a good fit to the Big Ten, but that's an option. And then maybe even like Temple. And I know people don't really like Temple, but I think that, if you replace Penn State with Temple, I think that would be, reasonable. You don't like that idea?
Well, what are your considerations? What are you putting into your priority list of expansion?
I'm not really one to, I just think that if you're going to do that sort of thing, and if you want to, I guess the ultimate, they want to all get to 16, I guess, which is, reasonable too, because I think when you get to 16, that weighs pretty good into the idea of a, expanded playoff, I guess. If everybody has 16, then it's like, well, they can have their own, kind of like what the SEC was talking about, we'll have our own little championship. Well, I think this is maybe a backlash to that. It's like, well, if the SEC is going to do that, then we need to do the same thing. So we need to get somebody in there so we can have our own little championship. And I just think the teams they're picking are the wrong teams. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm not the one to ask about it, but if I was going to take the time to get up to 16, I'd want to make sure that they were the right 16 teams. And I know Notre Dame's already connected to the ACC, so they might not want to leave, but I just think that Notre Dame would be a good fit, and then maybe Temple wouldn't be a very good fit, but I I can't think if Penn State, and I'm not saying Penn State would leave, but if Penn State left to the ACC, I mean, I can't think of a better, geographic area. I mean, you'd have to cover that areas with somebody. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe Temple would fit. And it's like, that's what I don't understand. And it's like, I got a lot of criticism for my suggestion to put Kansas and Tulane in the SEC. And the other team I would maybe put in there was Memphis. But those are, I think if you have to include 3 teams that aren't already connected with, the other ones are already kind of connected with some, they had to look out their own conference to get Oklahoma and Texas, which is
what kind of connection? If you're not, so it sounds like there's a geographic connection that you're making, but you're telling me that you're not. What is the connection, or what is the benefit of Kansas, Memphis, or Tulane joining the SEC? They suck at football. And when I say suck, I mean at a high level of football. I'm not degrading Memphis in particular because they've been successful on the American Conference level in recent years, but they do not bring anything to the SEC except for Memphis, a fairly large possibility of a base of population. I need to get to some other calls, but this is clearly about money and fans.
Well, no, I'm actually trying to.
The Big Ten going to Los Angeles and bringing in 2 just enormous universities.
Well, I don't know what I mean. You say, yeah, they're in the metropolitan areas. I understand that, but I don't know if that makes a team better playing in a metropolitan area. Am I wrong about that, Mark? I mean,
it brings people.
Well, people, sure, but it's like Memphis, for example. I mean, if it was based just on population, I guess Memphis probably would never enter into the. But it's like I think people need to kind of weigh the balance of it a little bit. It's like you say Kansas doesn't add anything. I don't know about that, Mark. I still think that's a very narrow look at it. I mean, they're not
a narrow look. They have a horrible football program, and nobody wants it.
They just won the basketball championship. I mean, that's number one. That's the best team.
Basketball has a very small portion of this compared to football. It's not even close.
Well, but still, they just won the NCAA championship. I mean, how many teams?
If somebody has the best swimming program in the country, it doesn't move the needle. Yes, basketball is important. It has a certain importance. It doesn't compare to football.
Well, and then they're a natural rival to Missouri. And so, I mean, that's kind of the same thing. It's like,
and I don't know that anybody cares about, they care about money. And the money comes in when you bring in people, fans, population base.
I guess I just disagree on the idea that putting 2 big metropolitan teams is going to make the Big Ten any better. I think that's not true. I don't think it
hell of a lot better. They just brought in USC.
Well,
UCLA's got a ton of potential. All right.
Potential, sure. I agree with that, but I don't know. USC hasn't been that great lately, have they? They've been okay.
They have not been great lately.
Well, not lately. Yeah, that's my point.
Neither is Texas, but anybody would be a fool to say that those aren't brand name, top of the line programs with tons of facilities, resources, people that care, fans. All of that come there. There are no negatives. The only negative in this entire deal, and I'm not talking about for college football. For college football, there's a ton of negatives because there's become a bidding war and a power struggle and all of that. Yes, and it's destroying smaller conferences. But from a national perspective, there are some issues. But from the standpoint of the Big Ten, you know what the only issue in any of this is? Travel. Travel makes it very difficult.
There you go. And that's where I'm trying to kind of put my 2 cents in. Is where I'm putting my 2 cents in.
You told me geography doesn't matter.
Well, no, I didn't. Well, I don't know, Mark. You can go ahead. I don't know that it really does, but I'm just saying, and I don't know that that's I don't think that should keep it from, but I just think that Colorado would be a better fit. That's all. I'm not saying that these other teams might not be better in terms of the way they might. But, I think if you don't weigh both into consideration, you're going to mess everything up. I think if you put the wrong teams in the wrong country, they won't like it. It's kind of what I'm trying to get at. They'll be like, this sucks.
Christopher, the last point I'll make that you need to keep in mind, and maybe you are, is that this would all be different if there was one governing body that controlled the entire sport and looked after everyone's good. But we don't have that. We have separate conferences doing what is best for them.
Do you really?
All right, I better move on. We got all sorts.
Just that's one more question, Mark. Do you really think my ideas are bad ideas? Do you think they're bad ideas?
They're bad ideas. I just don't think you're looking at the priorities that other people are looking at. You're looking at different priorities, and that doesn't mean you're wrong. Okay. I think you've got very valid points. But what's driving all this is money.
Well, I'm trying to look out after both. As far as that goes, I'm trying to look out after both. Whatever. I'm doing the best I can. All right, thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate your calls, and you've got valid points, and you know a ton about college football history. You've got great perspective. I don't want that to be discounted in any way. I'm just trying to provide the counter argument, which is this is why these moves are being made. Money, first and foremost, money.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, we got Lucine on the line. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Lucine joining us from San Antonio. How's it going? Welcome to the Voice of College Football.
Hello.
Hey.
I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
So, you know how USC and UCLA, they're coming from California. Well, wouldn't it not be a stretch to just add Florida State, because that's a big area too, and that might add some revenue to the SEC, or you can throw it in any conference you want.
That the SEC would go to Florida State?
What?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. The only issue there is that the member schools have to agree to bring in those, and I don't know what that voting structure has to be. So there can be some dissenters, but the University of Florida would clearly not vote for Florida State to join. Now they can be outvoted, just like Texas A&M was in bringing in Texas. So you make a good point. If this is going to continue to escalate, I would expect that the SEC's next move would be to try to bring in some semblance of Clemson, Florida State, Miami, some contingent along those lines.
And there's also Oregon. The first thing I heard about was, well, Oregon's basically all alone in the Pac-12. Wouldn't you want some competition? So maybe they could jump conferences.
Oregon, well, they're going to consider their situation now that the Pac-12 has been reduced to 10 teams and missing its biggest population base. Yeah, that's a big consideration for Oregon. They're kind of isolated now in the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
there's a whole bunch of these teams that.
Yes. Anything else for us, Lucine?
My connection is bad. I can't hear you.
Okay. Well, have a nice day. I appreciate you calling, and call back some other time. All right. We got Zach. No, first we got Sean. Where's Sean coming to us from? But first we got a super chat coming in from Matthew Miller. Hey, Mark, how many leagues are we headed for? How about 4 16-team leagues? That's been talked about for a long, long time. 4 at 16 teams. What's 16? We could kind of banty that back and forth. Oregon's in an interesting spot now. They are so isolated, and I understand with the current moves and the most recent moves, even going back to last summer, the geography's blown up, but still Oregon to be connected, let's say, to another conference that's a million miles away. What is the Pac-12 going to do? Maybe it's a Pac-12, Big 12. Maybe the lessers of the Pac-12 and Big 12 get left out and become Mountain West teams, and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 hook up. The best of the Pac-12 and the Big 12 that's left. But the Big 12 is pretty solid and strong from a numbers standpoint, not from an elite standpoint, but from a numbers standpoint. You got to think so. Well, we better get to these calls. We got Sean on the line. Hey, Sean.
Hey, this is Sean from Centerville. Hey, just calling and wanted to make a couple of quick points. It looks like to me that possibly the Big 12 decided to go with teams too quick. If they would have waited a little longer, they would have had some opportunities for some bigger fish out there. My other point is for the Big 10. If they're going to pull, I don't think they'll pull in an Oregon unless Nike has something to do with that. I would much rather pull in a Arizona State if we had to, because of the recruiting base in Arizona, which has really gained momentum in the last few years. My other point is, now what does Notre Dame do? Because Notre Dame is a big key with this, especially with USC. The Big Ten has a huge opportunity. They already have the biggest game of the year with Ohio State, Michigan. They will easily have, if they could land, if they could figure out a way to get Notre Dame to join, then they will have the second to third biggest game of the year, which is USC Notre Dame in many years. So to have that as a part of the Big Ten, to get Fox to bid for that, that would be huge. So to get that as a part of this, and then UCLA, real quick, the biggest thing that they offer is they have the Rose Bowl. So the Big Ten now has the Rose Bowl, which I think is a big piece. And now you can say, if the bowl games do go away, we can always say that we're going to be playing, our teams get to play in the Rose Bowl once out of every 4 years, or however they're going to do this. Another point is, if, let's say, they do try to bring in Notre Dame, they'll probably try to make it even. So what teams would you go after? Would you go after another West Coast team, or would you go after like a North Carolina, or I had somebody say Clemson, but Clemson is kind of a small market team. North Carolina, I think, has more potential for TV viewers, more potential for recruiting. So I'm not sure I would go with them. I mean, maybe I would go with the Florida State that was mentioned earlier, but Florida State's kind of a smaller market area. Maybe you would get the state of Florida. I'm not sure. Maybe you can give some color to that, but I think I honestly think that Notre Dame is the key here to see where things fall next. But there's no way, Chris was saying, bring in Notre Dame. There's no way Notre Dame was ever going to join the Big Ten unless something like this happened, where we got USC.
So, Sean, all good points across the board. There's nothing I disagree with. They're all things to be delved into. And yes, that next team, if it's with Notre Dame, you can go in those directions and you make really good points. I think Oregon, from a financial standpoint, brand standpoint, would be at the top of that list. And since there's already a connection with the West Coast and the Pac-12, go after Oregon. The first comment that you made, though, that the Big 12 should have acted first and gone after USC and UCLA?
No. I said they should have waited. They should have waited because there were bigger fish out there after this. Look at what just happened.
Do you really think that USC and UCLA would have joined the Big 12?
Oh, no. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they would have had a chance maybe at Oregon, a chance maybe at Washington. Now.
Well, they're going to have a 14-team league, and if everybody's gunning for 16, then maybe those possibilities still exist. Oregon, Washington to the Big 12.
That's true.
Right, true. Sean, anything else?
Oh, no, nothing else. Mark, this is a big day.
Absolutely.
Hopefully it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But
appreciate you joining.
Yep, have a great day.
Thanks, Sean. All right, we're going to bring in Zach from Arizona next here at the Voice of College Football. Hey, Zach.
Hello, Mark. So my question is, does Arizona and ASU decide to leave the Pac-12 to join the Big 12? Now, since UCLA and USC are going to leave to join the Big 10, do you think that's a feasible move for them?
Well, certainly when this happened to the Big 12 last year, my first initial thought was, I actually posted a video days after and said, go after these four: Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, and Houston. Mm-hmm. Because if your conference becomes vulnerable, see, we've seen this go both ways. Once the conference becomes vulnerable, if they don't act and they don't, then some of the existing members become scared off, and then they jump ship, and then the conference implodes and it's dissolved. Or they fortify themselves, they're able to rebound, and even if they're not as strong and able to replace that caliber of program, they can still make it happen and make it work, like the Big 12 was eventually able to do. I'm not an expert on the academics. I've heard all sorts of things about most Big 12 schools not being able to align with the Pac-12 when we were looking more in that direction of the Pac-12 adding versus what the Big 12 would be doing. The Big 12's got 14 schools, and I would think that they would, if they're going to cap off at 16, they would rather go. I like that Washington, Oregon consideration.
Yeah, I just know because they're like in a big area and like they're usually trying to go together as the same like package together as Arizona schools. And like I know also too, I know the Big 12 was looking at Memphis or like Boise State and everything like that for the group of 5. But I just thought maybe since USC, UCLA are moving, that Arizona and Arizona State should be looking to lead the Pac-12 too.
Oh, I think they would. I think again, it's going to be some kind of a race for survival, and otherwise there's going to be, you know, the numbers aren't, they will not work out perfectly. Therefore, you're going to have attrition, and you're going to have your leftovers have to run to the Mountain West to save their football programs and just remain in play.
Yeah. So my second question is: do you think the Mountain West teams are just going to stay like together as a Mountain West, or do you think they're also going to be looking to move maybe to the Pac-12 now since USC and UCLA are moving?
Well, the Pac-12 is down to 10. The academia, that's the word I was looking for. They would tell you that there are no Mountain West schools that qualify for Pac-12 membership.
Yeah. But, you know, since conference alignment is happening, I don't know. Maybe they just say, let's go ahead. I don't know.
And from a football standpoint, Boise State gives you something, but from any other standpoint, they really give you nothing. San Diego State gives you a market.
Well, who do you think maybe the Pac-12 goes after somebody like a Memphis maybe, or like another team from like out west, maybe Midwest or out east now, since, you know, you get anybody now.
Yeah, so that we all think geography, and that's still in play, but not nearly as much as it used to be.
No.
But just to grab schools to fill spots, I don't think anyone should be wise to do that. Like, there is a reason why the Big 12 went after those 4 schools, and those were the 4 best possibilities for them, really.
Yeah, and I feel like it'd be a great fit for them no matter what, yeah. And then I have a third question, and I don't know. This is kind of like, but do you think maybe the Pac-12 and maybe the Big 12 one day will merge?
Well,
like,
I
become a
said
super
that off
conference?
the top. Yeah, I said, you know, if this kind of continues, then maybe we've got a situation where the Pac-12 and the Big 12 do merge, and some of those leftover teams are running to the Mountain West.
No, I'm saying like the 10
elsewhere.
teams in the Pac-12 right now. They say the 10 teams, but the 14 teams in the Big 12 all combined make like a big super conference. No leftover teams or anything. No teams moving Mountain West, just like in one big like super conference.
Well, again, we're going to find out how important academics are in the Pac-12's academic standards, because otherwise that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I just think if you're a Pac-12 school, not all the Pac-12 schools can move to Big 10, you know? I feel like they kind of have to like find another conference they can all join.
I'm going to have to start working on the numbers, but I think we could arrive at 16.
Yeah, I know 16
in 4 conferences.
Yeah, I know 16 can work in the Big 10, but if you're saying like all the Pac-12 schools are now looking for different conferences, you know, and they're high in academics because they're Pac-12, then where do all the other schools go to, you know?
They're going to play in the Mountain West.
Well, I don't think the Mountain West, I don't think Cal, Stanford, all these schools will like want to go to Mountain West because, you know, because they're the Power 5.
Well, they won't
you know?
want to. No. And the other thing beyond that, and when I say academic standards, I'm not just talking about the academic standards themselves. I'm also talking about the money connected with these endowments that, based on the information we have, and we had Joey Altmaier on a couple of weeks ago, who is a consultant and strategist and really researches all this stuff really well. These endowments make football money look like nothing. And Stanford and Cal have enormous endowments that they bring to the Pac-12.
Also, too, when you say by Mountain West, I don't think the level of play in the field. I think Cal and Stanford would dominate the Mountain West if they had to
They
go to that point.
should.
Yeah, but I don't think it would be fair, like for the other schools in the Mountain West that play other Group of Fives and have to play like these Cal and Stanford. I know Cal and Stanford aren't as good as what they used to be, but they still play as a Power 5 school right now and get all these high level recruits. And
The series between the two conferences this past year was only 7-6, and the Mountain West was arguably, after Utah, better just this season. So I'm not
yeah. I know you're talking about the season. I'm saying, like, I don't know in the next 10 years how good they would be,
Yeah.
but just overall, Cal and Stanford, all these schools are Power 5 schools.
Yep.
I don't know how good the Mountain West would be against them, playing them every year,
Well, Zach, the calls are piling up here, so I appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for your call.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Thank you.
All right, let's move it on to Jared. And before we take Jared's call here, let me reconfigure these helmets because I was all set up for USC UCLA display here that I'm obviously blocking. So we'll do something with that. But anyway, more importantly, we got Jared on the line. Ohio State fan. How's it going?
Good. Glad to hear the news. For a second there, I thought the Big Ten was just going to watch the SEC just take over the entire.
I know it. I did too, because the Big Ten's conservative by nature. It is, but there's new leadership and it's a new age, and they also know how to count money. They do accounting pretty well in the Big Ten, so they understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the number one thought that came to mind was they need to. The Big Ten needs to close the door with Notre Dame. I mean, if they don't, I feel like that's a bad miss because of the geography, the viewers. It's just a common sense addition to the Big Ten.
Oh, it fits in every conceivable way, financially, geography. The football, just I can't even describe it. Beyond the history, just the fabric of what the Big Ten is on the football field and in its history and prestige and tradition, and Notre Dame, obviously Notre Dame, Michigan State, Notre Dame, Purdue through the year. It's a perfect fit from a football standpoint. That's all I think about. That's all I care about. And academically, of course, the Big Ten has high standards, and Notre Dame does as well.
Absolutely. And you know what? That week 1 game is probably going to be, it's just going to be a taste of what it could be. I do think that if the game is close and it's just a crazy crowd, and I believe it's at Ohio State week 1, that could be a tipping point for the University of Notre Dame to say, hey, let's make this happen.
At some point, the money has to talk. So it was often thought for years that Notre Dame was getting rich off of its TV contract, but that's been brought to light in recent years that it's not. It's just stubborn, and it wants to maintain its national brand and its national scope and all of that. But that ACC money and them playing the majority of those games against Duke and Georgia Tech and Syracuse isn't what it would be playing in the Big Ten. And now that these revenue figures are going to exceed $90 million for teams in the Big Ten and the SEC per team, and the Big 12, for example, is going to be in the $35 million, $40 million range, then at some point, this is going to speak to Notre Dame, and the money is just going to slap them across the face. Plus, if we get into a college football playoff situation in which they can never get a bye because they can't win a conference and they're always stuck playing a first-round game the years they make the playoff, that may push them a little bit too.
Absolutely. Another thought that came to mind, I understand that Rutgers was added for the money and the TV viewership, but I do think it is time to move on. Sorry for any Rutgers fans out there. They're just not really, let's just say Rutgers was dropped and Notre Dame was added. That's a net gain. The Big Ten would be getting a net gain there. And I do think it may be time to move on.
The Big Ten, and I'll make this comment and then I'll let you finish this up because, we're about 10 calls behind. But, the Big Ten reminds me of conversations I had with ESPN my last few years concerning what I'm doing. Cable TV was too highly regarded and digital media too lowly regarded. And the Big Ten caught Maryland and Rutgers right at the peak before the tipping point of cable distribution versus digital distribution, and they overvalued the concept of having Baltimore, New York City, and Washington, D.C. through cable markets, through those two schools especially. Yes. So,
All right. Hey, I know you got a lot of callers. I do have one more comment, kind of just
Sure.
a quick thought. I know there was some mentions on Florida schools for the Big Ten, but I was thinking Miami. I mean, Miami might be a decent fit for the Big Ten, large city, get that pipeline going into the state of Florida for the Big Ten. I mean, that may be a good addition as well down the pipeline.
Absolutely. And strong academic private school as well. Jared, thank you so much for the call.
I appreciate it, Mike. Mark, have a good one.
Thank you. All right. We got Sean on the line here at the Voice of College Football. Sean, appreciate you being here.
Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Sean, where are you calling us from, or who do you root for? Just want to build a banner here.
Okay, I'm calling from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Very good.
Ohio State, Cincinnati fan. Originally, the initial caller, who was Sean, is from Centerville, Ohio, and that's actually where I was born and spent the first several years of my life.
Very
Right,
cool.
Centerville.
Ohio State and Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Okay. So if
So-
they play, which they did, when was the last time they played? They
It's
played
in 2019.
Oh, they just played that 42-0 game.
Yeah. I mean, I got to root for the Buckeyes in most situations because a loss to them is way worse. A loss for Ohio State to Cincinnati is way worse, right? A loss for Cincinnati to Ohio State. But so I find it really interesting that, like, right as we're all talking about scrapping divisions, we're expanding all these conferences to be completely unworkable unless you have divisions.
It's a good point. I was getting into that. Yep.
I mean, how can you have a 16, 18, 20 team league? You can't even come close to guaranteeing any sort of balance in the schedule right there. And I don't know. I mean, like there's a lot of threads pulling in different directions in college football all at the same time right now, it seems, on a number of different issues. And it's fascinating and frustrating to watch it all. I can't really predict exactly how anything's going to look 5 years from now at all. And I think one of the things I've loved about college football has been sort of the consistency and the tradition through it. I think that's what a lot of people really enjoy about the sport. And now, I mean, it's becoming like the crypto market or something. I mean, it's just insane. I mean, obviously the college football fans will be there. We love the sport. We love the game, and we'll tolerate a lot of the things that make us uncomfortable with it. But I just don't see this kind of volatility being great for the sport long term, even if it's good for the individual institutions in the moment.
Yeah, sports fans have shown, just even outside of college football, that we will put up with a lot of garbage because once noon hits week one of college football season, okay, then we just like to see guys run into each other and, see the color that we hate versus the color we love going up against each other, so we can tolerate a lot of stuff. The first point that you made, Sean, I think is an interesting one, in that without divisions and with a larger conference, the larger the conference, and with only 8 games, maybe 9 now being played within the conference, the greater the likelihood that you have difficulty determining 2 teams that should play in the conference championship game. Yeah. So you could have 2 teams, let's say, competing for second place. Let's say you've got your number 1 seed went 8-0 in the conference. Then you got 2 teams that went 7-1. They didn't play each other. So what's fair? Because
or possibly more. You could have like 4 teams that went 6-2, and there's maybe 1 common game.
You've got all sorts of
you
create more possibility of issues, and this is direct entry into the playoff too.
Yeah,
as a conference champion, based on the latest proposal that we're anticipating is going to go through at some point, that all the conference championships are going to mean a playoff spot, and 4 out of 5 of them are going to be a bye, possibly. that that could be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, and how can you even maintain a Power 5 with this kind of expansion? I mean, right now it almost looks like we're heading towards 2 mega conferences. I mean, like you're going to have pretty much every sort of elite blue blood, program. I mean, not in terms of exactly what they're performing on the field, but what they produce, fiscally. And what they, and all these things. I mean, you take USC and UCLA out of the Pac-12. What is the Pac-12 now? You take Texas and Oklahoma out of the Big 12. What is the Big 12? Potentially, you take Clemson, Miami, Florida State out of the ACC. What is that league now? You can add some lower level programs to kind of bandage it together. Cincinnati is the perfect bandage program. I don't know, like we joined the Big East. While the Big East was just after Virginia Tech and Miami left, just to try to keep it together, and that eventually fell apart. I think the same thing probably in some form will happen in the Big 12. I mean, the top program in that league right now is Oklahoma State by all the metrics I mentioned. I mean, and like clearly no one's even close to Oklahoma State in terms of putting performance on the field and, the amount of money and resources they have. If that's their number one program, and these two other leagues have, one league has Texas, Oklahoma, LSU, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and another league has Ohio State, Michigan, UCLA, USC, UCLA, and possibly Notre Dame down the line. I mean, everything is just going to be concentrated in these two leagues. The structure is going to be just completely unworkable. I mean, it's just and I have a feeling eventually we're going to get to some sort of conference fluid situation where you're going to see teams moving in and out of leagues, maybe teams getting expelled. Maybe the Big Ten looks and says, hey, we kind of like Oklahoma State, Illinois, you're providing nothing to us. Get the hell out, go join the MAC or something. Like I could see. I mean, it's so hard to predict anything that's going to happen in the long run, but I mean, we're in a very bizarre, interesting new place in this sport. I don't particularly like everything that's going on, and I mean, I'd just be very, very happy when September comes around and I can put this in the back of my mind for a few months and just focus on what's happening on the field.
I am with you, Sean, and I'm not going to talk too much because we got so many other callers. Yes. So we're going to go to Matt Zemek here from Trojans Wire. Any other further points, Sean?
No. Hey, I'm glad to see your channel blowing up. You really deserve it, Mark.
Thank you so much for that, Sean. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
See you soon. We got Matt Zemek on the line from Trojans Wire. We're going to bring him in right now. And everybody else, stay on the line. What we're going to do is I want to get Matt's initial thoughts, and then we can bring you guys on to ask Matt and myself questions and deliver your comments. So stay right there, but we want to prioritize Matt here. Let me get to these two super chats. I appreciate the contributions, folks. Okay. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Boise State to the Pac-12. We talked about the academic considerations there, and Boise State from a standpoint of the product on the field, yes, but from every other criteria, whether that's academics, facilities, resources, money, rear ends in the seats, TV ratings, that's not much of a draw for the Pac-12. Oink, oink, thank you so much for the contribution. So is the Rose Bowl going to be the Big Ten's conference championship game? Well, it is a prized venue, and the Big Ten certainly would have its grip on it. All right, let's. We did have Matt on the line. Now we've got Tony Siracusa. So we will take Tony as well. We appreciate Tony stopping by. He's
all right, now I got you.
Home.
Yeah, sorry about it. I was actually on the other side of Charlotte and was making phone calls to sources on the way back, and
I can imagine
probably breaking a handful of traffic laws on the, on the way back, but here I am.
Well, Tony, thanks for stopping by, and you're always a go-to when these situations happen. All right, so your initial response before we delve into anything specific, USC, UCLA to the Big Ten.
My initial response was shock. Of course, John Wilner was the first to report it, and Wilner has had a long history of impeccable sourcing within the conference. My second reaction after that was, it's possible, but there's a lot of logistical work that has to be done. And there still is. And then my third reaction, as I talk to some other people, is this is going to happen. It just is. Within probably an announcement of intent, probably even as close as 72 hours away. There are logistical challenges, none the least of which is UCLA has to get permission from the UC Board of Regents to do this. And that is not, a foregone conclusion. The UC Board of Regents is not going to rubber stamp anything. There is also the part of the exit. As we've seen with Texas and Oklahoma and other schools, there is money that is owed to get out. UCLA has an athletic department that is currently $100 million in debt with a school that will not bail it out. The university, the administration, is giving UCLA low interest loans to try and get out from the debt. That's not like what Cal did, where the Cal administration just paid off the athletic department's debt. So there are some logistical issues. USC, it's a lot easier. It's a private school, can come and go as it pleases, do what it wants. I think part of the other challenge, maybe not challenge, but as you get to the granular, which, I like doing sometimes too much, is this is going to happen right as the new Pac-12 TV deals are being finalized. I mean, 2024 is the year where the deals with ESPN and Fox get finalized. They start negotiating in 6 months. And this just gets weird. I mean, how do you do this with that going on? The Big Ten contract, as everybody has noted, is already done. It's a gargantuan contract. And the Big Ten, I would assume Commissioner Kevin Warren has already gone to his schools and said, we're going to have to divvy up that same size pie. It's now going to get a little bit smaller for everybody, but the trade-off is we're bringing in the Los Angeles television market into our conference. So there are a lot of moving parts, and I'm stunned that it could be put together this quietly and this quickly. And I got to wonder what George Kliavkoff is thinking. Pac-12 media days are in 2 weeks. Boy, is that going to be awkward.
So, Tony, I'm going to make a few assumptions here, or just spitball some things, and you tell me.
That's all I'm doing too, is spitballing.
And we're also going to bring in, we're at the spitball stage. I jump on here when we've got breaking news. I jump on and I let people know I know as much as you do. Let's just dive into this and see where we land. We're going to bring in Matt Semick from Trojans Wire. We can do a little USC, UCLA. Hey, I don't know if it's this or they're kind of working to get their together moving on to the Big Ten. Strange bedfellows, just kind of like Texas, Oklahoma a year ago.
Right.
So UCLA, what are the lucratives, the positives for the Big Ten? Are major market size.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe USC doesn't leave without them.
Well, you have to have two teams going, because you essentially have to do this. If you're all of a sudden going to be playing the majority of your schedule in the Midwestern part of the country, you have to have a travel partner type of scenario. Yeah. So they can't go by themselves. And obviously the two of these make the most sense, just as if it were to be Arizona and Arizona State, or Oregon State, whatever. You need that travel partner scenario.
Yeah. So from a what are the other benefits to the Big Ten for UCLA?
For UCLA, right now, money. the Big Ten TV contract, even if it's being divvied up among 14 teams or whatever at this point, the money is more than what the Pac-12 network deal is going to be. By all estimations, and it's hard. And look, it's hard to forecast 2 years out, but by any forecast, the Big Ten and the SEC own money right now in terms of TV deals. The ACC can't compare in any scenario, and the Big 12 isn't even close. So it's about money for UCLA. It's not about getting the chance to go play Rutgers in New Jersey. That is one of the most bizarre conference games you can imagine, or going to College Park, Maryland, or, the Terps coming out to Los Angeles. I almost said out here, forgetting I live in North Carolina now. But it's there's going to have to be a lot of rejiggering of what the conference looks like in terms of the matchups. It was funny. I was doing a show earlier today, and we were talking about how the ACC announced this week that they were going to the 3-5-5, format and getting rid of the divisions, and the Pac-12 had already done that in the Mountain West. And I made a comment that it's tough to do in the Big Ten because everyone wants to try and keep the rival games. But the Big Ten, I mean, half of their schedule are for these, trophies, the Floyd of Rosedale and Paul Bunyan's axe and, whatever else there is. So what are the rival games? This is going to throw that on its ears. And look, if UCLA and USC really are going, and like I said, from the time I left where I was and tried to get on your show and then making calls on the way home, it went from it's possible with some obstacles to yes, it's going to happen within the next 72 hours. There will at least be the announcement of intent. This will not be the end of it, though. This will be the end of the Pac-12, because other schools are gonna wind up moving also. Because if you're the Pac-12 without the Los Angeles market, what are you?
So we want to cover this topic from as many information bases as possible. We also want to keep everybody involved because we got like 10 people waiting on the line. So this is what we're going to do. Tony, Matt, Tony. We got Matt Zemek joins us each and every Tuesday.
I read Matt's work. He's great. He does great work.
Yes, Matt and I go live each and every Tuesday at 1 Pacific time on the USC channel, folks. Trojans Live. It's a great show. We've been going for 8 weeks strong, so we appreciate Matt jumping online with us. Tony Siragusa, who has covered UCLA for us by extension of our friends over at Last Word on College Football, now covers Wake Forest as he has transitioned to the East Coast. But Tony, a longtime Bruin, it's his lineage and heritage. So I'll let you guys dice it up, and then we'll start bringing in some callers. And I want to respect both of your time, so just let me know when you need to drop off, and we'll let some callers come in and directly ask questions. But Matt, I'll set it up this way. We were sitting here a year ago, roughly, with Texas, Oklahoma, and there were a lot of crazy notions out there, and one of them was USC, UCLA to the Big Ten.
Well, I recall, I don't remember the precise date, but we have one of our live shows about a month ago, maybe like 4 weeks ago here on the Voice of College Football, and the topic came up, would USC leave the Pac-12? And I firmly told you no, because George Kliavkoff's done a great job. He clearly did everything he could to put USC in a much better position to succeed. Right after the Pac-12 championship game formatting adjustment, removing USC from the constraint of having to win the Pac-12 South, you do it the top 2 model that the Big 12 uses. Like, that was just like a very tangible demonstration of, hey, I want USC football to have a maximum chance of succeeding, of doing well, of competing for the Pac-12 championship, of representing the Pac-12 in the college football playoff, in the Rose Bowl. So George Kliavkoff did absolutely everything he could in 1 year. That's the other thing. He had only 1 year on the job, and one would have to think that when Texas and Oklahoma made the move to the SEC last July, Kliavkoff was on the job for just a couple weeks. So if USC and UCLA had made their mind up then to make the move to the Big Ten. There's nothing George Kliavkoff could have done to prevent that from happening. And obviously, this raises the larger point that Larry Scott just spoiled everything in the Pac-12, just ruined the conference's brand and reputation and its media rights value on so many levels that USC felt dissatisfied enough that, hey, when we get an opportunity, when the chessboard changes, and Texas, Oklahoma to the SEC was precisely that change, so this was very much brewing for a while. There's nothing George Kliavkoff could have done to stop it. And he proved that he wanted USC football to do well. You can't lay any of this at his feet. This was what Larry Scott failed to do. And there's really a bitter irony in all of this, isn't there? Because the Pac-12 at the start of Larry Scott's tenure wanted Texas and Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, and the Pac-12 presidents shot that down. Now, of course, Texas did get cold feet, so it's not as though the Pac-12 presidents were the last thing standing in the way of that move, but they did stand in the way of that move. And everything could have been different. We could have had a Pac-16 with Texas and Oklahoma in the fold, and now Texas and Oklahoma going instead to the SEC creates the impetus for USC to leave the Pac-12 and possibly kill the conference. And so Larry Scott's failure over a decade ago initiates a decade-long series of events in which George Kliavkoff is left holding the bag through absolutely no fault of his own.
It's remarkable. I know that fans don't necessarily care about this, but I'm just thinking logistics. So we have seen the geography of college football stretched. This is completely just stretched it to the nth degree and torn it apart. We're going coast to coast now. Rutgers, as Tony alluded to, Rutgers in Maryland to Los Angeles and back and forth. And everybody's thinking football. They play once a year. They don't have to play every year. They play, some of these teams in the conference will play once every 4 years. Talking about every sport. We're talking about sports that play long schedules, baseball schedules of 50 and 55 games and 20, 30 game conference schedules in a baseball season, and all these Olympic sports. And yes, there are I've seen several comments. We've got airplanes.
If I could jump in on that, there's a point, and again, I'm getting into the granular and digging deep and beyond what's on the surface. I actually think that this financially ends some of the Olympic sports. I don't think you're going to be able to continue to finance them when you've got to ship them cross country, non-revenue sport. They're going to get reduced to something other than what they currently are. Because if we take this on the assumption that it's about money and they're going to get this piece of the fantastic Big Ten TV contract, which we're going to assume is better than what the Pac-12 will be getting 2 years from now, it's still only going to go so far because your expenses are going to go up tremendously. We joke about the travel, but you bring up a good point, Mark, in that we're talking about a baseball team going and having a 3-game weekend series in College Park, and then, having to come back and then going to Champaign or, wherever. And it's the expense of this is extraordinary, regardless of what the new TV revenue will be.
And to extend on that point, Tony, as you both well know and could explain better than I, the Pac-12 has done a masterful job of shrinking the conference geographically by smartly scheduling and allowing teams to travel and then stay and pick off at least the 2 teams within that state, regardless of the sport. But if you're going to do that as USC and UCLA, when the rest of the conference is on the other side of the country, you're going to basically live playing Maryland and Penn State and Rutgers for a month. And some of these athletes are going to be like, I signed and took a scholarship to actually live in Los Angeles and play sports in
Right.
Southern California, not live in
Right.
the East Coast for months at a time.
No, look, I think that's a great point. And it's, if you're an athlete, and I see someone here, if I'm looking at the screen correctly, Nate, saying that if you're a UCLA women's volleyball player, flying the entire way cross country multiple times is not what you signed up for. You've got, look, they still have to go to classes, whether we want to admit it or not, whether people want to acknowledge student athletes or whether they're really just athletes. This makes the student part of it tremendously hard. And it's you can't maintain the conference, as I was saying earlier, you can't maintain the conference as is without UCLA and USC football, and basketball for that matter. You just can't. The rest of the conference can't financially sustain itself.
There's one bitter irony in all this. And Tony, I was brought on early enough to hear that you are living in North Carolina. So old time ACC country. So you can definitely identify with this next point. Lefty Drizel, when he built Maryland in the 1970s, what did he say? He said he wanted to create the UCLA of the East.
Right.
And now Maryland and UCLA can play each other in the same conference.
Right. It's just,
insane.
It is. And I think, because having grown up on the West Coast and watching all this for so many decades, the Pac-12 always did a good job with the travel partner model, right? Especially with basketball, especially when it was the Pac-10 and you were just playing the other 9 opponents. USC and UCLA both go down to Arizona. One plays Arizona, one plays ASU. They flip. You go back home. And it really worked very well. I mean, frankly, it was one of the most perfect models you could ask for. Going to 12 teams kind of messed that up a little bit, but you have to wonder, look, I don't think if this does happen, and all indications are that it will, it's not the end. Other teams will leave. It will also, and I can tell you out here, from conversations, I had an interview with John Curry, the athletic director at Wake Forest, about 3 weeks ago. Was very gracious, sat down with us for 45 minutes for a one-on-one, no topics off the table. And we talked about conference moving, because I said, there's going to be more. There just has to be. This isn't it. And he said, there is going to be more, and we don't know what it's going to look like. He said, but if you've been in this long enough, you know that this happens routinely. If you're old enough, you remember the Southwest Conference and the Big 8 and the Pac-8 and things like that. My issue to him now was, but we're really headed towards 2 conferences. We're really headed towards a Big 10 with 20 teams, an SEC with 20 teams, and other schools on the outside looking in, in smaller conferences.
Yeah, as you talked, and as I'm, we're all processing this information in real time. It's all so fresh. But one of the things we just posted at Trojans Wire, we're going with the obvious speculative stories. Like, we're just putting the questions out there. We don't have the final answers, but did Lincoln Riley want to coach in the Big 10 all along? And was that part of Mike Bohn's sales pitch to Lincoln Riley? You're going to coach in the Big 10. This is part of our lure to you. Speculation. But the other speculative story we've posted is, are we going to have 4 16-team super conferences or 2 24-team mega conferences? And actually, just as I'm thinking about all this, I'm thinking, you know what? We're probably going to have 2 32-team conferences, 32-team SEC, 32-team Big 10. I think just right now, I think that's where we're headed. And why a 32-team super duper triple fudge Sunday conference? Because you could then create 2 16-team subdivisions, right, where you get the geographical balance, and you're not asking USC to go, to the Eastern time zone on a regular basis. So in other words, the Big 10, a 32-team Big 10, if we just allow ourselves to run with this scenario a little bit, the 32-team Big 10 is going to swallow up the Big 12. And a 32-team SEC is going to swallow up the ACC, so that you get more geographical balance, and so you can have USC making road trips to Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, USC and Oklahoma, or USC and Nebraska at least, in the same conference. So I think you're going to see, right now, if you ask me, I would say like a 32 team super duper conference, so that teams would be traveling, from like the the Pacific time zone to the Central time zone, and a trip to the Eastern time zone would be very rare for USC, for UCLA. If you ask me right now, that's probably where it's going, because this just doesn't seem tenable to ask USC to be traveling to the Eastern time zone with such great regularity. And one would have to think that, at least in the short term, if they can't get a 32 team conference, that a lot of these teams are going to have to play consecutive road games. Like, you don't want them zigzagging. So USC might stay in Columbus. I mean, we'll go to Columbus and then we'll stay in Happy Valley the week after. Like, you're not going to ask USC to fly back to the coast. You're just going to double up. And similarly for basketball, like, you will see, I would have to think, like, UCLA basketball making 4 straight trips to traditional Big Ten schools, and then they go home to Los Angeles and play like 6 straight home games. You can't have home road
right.
Each week. You're going to have to see teams camping out on the road and then getting a longer period at home, so that you're reducing plane flights. It's interesting that we're talking about all these scheduling things. I know that I might be running a little bit far afield, but it's worth thinking about all of these things. In the pandemic, we saw how complicated the logistics got for and the NBA, also Major League Baseball in particular, because you're playing every day. Why are we asking teams to fly 3 times to another city? We should be asking them to fly at most 2 times. And frankly, like, if you have like today, the Yankees and the Astros were both physically located in New York on Wednesday. The Astros visited the Mets, and the Yankees hosted the A's at Yankee Stadium. They are both flying to Houston to play 1 game today as part of the remade schedule. That is absolute insanity. All right. And so baseball should be thinking about having the various teams just play like a 6-game series in one city. So it all brings back the point of, this is a chance to greatly reimagine how we schedule college sports games, how we schedule travel, how we fit all the pieces of the puzzle together. It's going to be really interesting to see how it shakes out.
Let's get to some callers here at the Voice of College Football. We got Tony Syracuse on the line from Last Word on College Football, Matt Zemek, Trojans Wire. We've got a USC show every Tuesday, so join us at 1 Pacific time. Dakota joining us. Welcome to the Voice of College Football.
Hey, what's going on, Mark?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm at Disney World with the kids, but I had to get into this call-in show right quick to kind of share my thoughts.
Thanks, Dakota. What do you have for us?
No worries. So, first question is this: how do you think, like you was talking about earlier, like traveling, like in regards to like USC playing Michigan, USC playing Ohio State, like how is that going to work, like logistically? Like, you think if they have to go like not back-to-back weekends, but like in regards to like if they had to say USC played Michigan 1 week and then not the next week, but the following week, right? Isn't that kind of a lot of traveling, kind of jet lag or whatnot on the teams?
Yeah, so I just made the point that you're going to see double road and double home stacks at the very least, if not triple road and triple home stacks, so that teams will camp out on the road for 3 weeks and then they'll be at home for 3 weeks, so that you just can't be zigzagging across the country.
I think Matt also brought up an interesting point earlier about how you're going to wind up when you get to the ultimate super conferences, which is probably 2, 3, maybe 4 years at the most down the road, that you wind up dividing them into territories, which is ironic because right now we've got conferences eliminating the divisions so that the top 2 teams play. But when you have 32 teams in a conference, you can't do that, and you're going to have to go back to divisions. But you'll do it on a geographic basis so that you can't eliminate the travel and, as we talked about earlier, the tremendous expense that this is going to put on athletic departments. But you minimize it as best you can, as Matt talked about earlier.
Anything
Right.
else, Dakota?
Right. So, how do you think also, like, USC or UCLA, like, how do you think, one, the divisions, how they're going to put those two either, like, in which, like, east or the west, and then how they're going to fare against, like, that weather and stuff? Because the West Coast in December, in November, is definitely not the same weather like it is in Michigan. So it'll kind of be, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think it's going to take a while for many of the Pac-12 teams, Arizona and Arizona State are going to have a hard time adjusting. Washington State, probably not so much. If you've ever been up to Pullman in November, it's hellish. So, there will be a little bit of hardship on some of the schools that aren't so used to it. Definitely.
Right. Thanks so much for you guys' time.
Thanks, Dakota. Appreciate you. All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. We got J-Dub on the line. J-Dub, how you doing?
Hey, just fine, Mark. How are we doing today?
Doing just fine. Appreciate you calling. What you got?
I am currently a 5-minute walk from Ryan Field off the campus of Northwestern in Evanston.
Hang out for a little while and you can catch UCLA in town.
Well, I thought to myself, if I see Pat Fitzgerald walk by, I'm just going to holler at him, "Hey, Pat, what the hell are they doing to our game?" I'm a capital T traditionalist, and I just hate this, although I'm a big fan of the USC Song Girls. I have to confess that out in the open. I want to ask Tony, he kind of brought this up. I was aware of the debt that UCLA has.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, just out of mischief or just out of a sense of entitlement and where they think they belong, could the Cali Board of Regents wreak a little havoc on this decision?
Oh, absolutely. Mark and I touched on that at the very beginning. The University of California Board of Regents has to approve UCLA making this move. It is not a rubber stamp, but it's not out of the realm. I don't think that they're going to put up a huge fight. I think they're going to make UCLA have to answer for the financial aspects of this, how they intend to pay for it, being at a university where the administration is doing little to nothing to help the athletic department with its $100 million debt, and how they intend to handle this. And I think UCLA is going to have to go to the Board of Regents with a debt restructuring plan about how, what money is going to come in from the Big Ten contract, what their share is going to be, what their expenses are going to be. They can announce their intent. There are some challenges that UCLA has that USC, being a private school, does not have. And the Board of Regents is going to make them answer for it. But ultimately, I think if UCLA can prove that they can handle this financially, they'll sign off on it.
Well, then I'll throw one more thing out there, and then I'll get out of the way, because I know there's got to be a long queue of people who want to get on. And that is, I do not myself believe this is likely, but is it possible that there be some kind of arrangement like Notre Dame had made with the ACC, where UCLA and USC enter into an agreement with the Big Ten, but let's say they limited it to football and men's and women's basketball only? Is that a possibility?
Matt, what do you think? I think so.
I think there's a strong possibility of that, because, the obvious, as Tony very eloquently said, like this is not what the Olympic sports athletes signed up for. And obviously, swimming and diving and water polo, like there's a West Coast identity to those sports. Growing up on the beach, and USC and UCLA both have, world-class water polo programs. It just that would just seem like a real unnecessary lift to push them into the Big Ten kicking and screaming. Why not just keep the Olympic sports in the Pac-12? That makes all the sense in the world.
And to take Matt's point one step further, both of these are schools that go well out of their way to tout the success of their Olympic sport championships. Stanford is #1 in the country in its NCAA championships. UCLA is 2 and SC is 3. and it's a massive drop off to whoever number 4 is. I'm pretty sure it's an SEC team. So I think that, they don't want to just, snub their nose at the Olympic sports and tell them whatever, suck it up and deal with it, cupcake. I think they want to try and do what is best to try and accommodate it, again, because it becomes an extraordinary financial burden to take your softball team to the Midwest for 2 weeks.
Well, I make that connection because I'm thinking of, I'm in contact with a lot of the Iowa State football players as part of my job. I know that the tight end Charlie Kohler, quarterback Brock Purdy, were honestly, in my opinion, just as pleased to have both graduated with their degrees magna cum laude as they were being late round draft choices, because they know in 10 years they're not going to be in the NFL, even if they have a short NFL career. And in their mid 30s, they're going to have something. And I think of all these kids, I think of the USC men's golf team, the rowing team at UCLA women. I mean, all these kids, I don't want to see them lose an academic opportunity because all of us football fans forced a decision that they didn't have anything to do with. And I'll get out of the way. Thanks so much for everything you guys are doing today. And folks, hit that thumbs up button for Mark. Help him out.
Thanks, J-Dub. Always appreciate you being here.
Hey, Mark, if I could comment, I know J-Dub jumped off the line, but if I could make one more comment on that, because look, there's a part of me, and you and I have joked about this, talking about the USC UCLA games, and like I went to and so this, I went to my first college football game in 1972 when I was 7 years old and was hooked from that very moment. So I love the tradition of everything, and I love that, third week in November when I was growing up meant you wake up, you turn on the Ohio State-Michigan game, and then you head over to the Coliseum for the UCLA-USC game when both teams were still playing there. And those two games usually defined who was going to be in the Rose Bowl. And I get it. I really do. And I have moments where I start to sound like the guy yelling at people to get off my lawn. But the change is inevitable. It really is. And so it's about the process and how you get there.
That's a great segue, Tony, before we take our next call, because that's what I wanted to hit you both up with, because we come on here and writers, analysts, whatever tag we want to put on us. We're college football fans, just like everybody else. We love the sport. That's why we do what we do. So UCLA guy, Matt, I don't know your origins in regards to your fanhood, but your fandom, but how does this move you as a college football fan or a fan of your particular school? We'll start with you, Tony, as a UCLA fan. From that side of it, aside from just trying to figure out the logistics and the money and who gains what and what it's going to mean down the road.
Yeah, it's challenging to look at it because, as you said, the reporter in me puts on my analytics hat. I had to put away my UCLA fandom, as you know, for the 5 years I covered the team, and had to kind of shove that way down deep and be the reporter and the analyst and all that. If we go back to my time before then and just being a college football guy and a UCLA guy, I don't like it. I don't like this change. I really don't. I know it's about money, and that's why I don't like it, because that's all it's about. It's not about improving the competitive nature. We're going to hear a press conference where we're going to talk about the academic likeness between Big Ten schools and Pac-12 schools and the similarities in mindset, and it's garbage. It's about money and nothing more. I don't like it.
Yeah, I absolutely hate it. And I think one really big topic before we get back to the phones here at the Voice of College Football is that Rose Bowl's dead, right? The bowl system's
what do you do
dead.
with it? Yeah.
The bowl system is dead. Like the Rose Bowl's desire to have its traditional place in the bowl system, it's blown up because you don't have the Big Ten, Pac-12 setup anymore. You don't have the tradition anymore. Like this is now just an exhibition game, or at least it's just a pawn in a larger sea of postseason properties. What is the point of having USC and UCLA in the Big Ten if you want the Rose Bowl to mean anything? Like, so now you don't have USC and Michigan, USC and Ohio State in the Rose Bowl anymore. And if you don't have that, you don't have anything. So I think like the Rose Bowl's claim to any kind of footing or foothold in the sport just got blown up. And I think like the bowls as we've known them, that's done. Like you just play a bunch of playoff games now. And I think that's another really big ripple effect of today's move.
Which may be killing our call-in show for later. I wanted to take what we were talking about earlier, Matt, when we were talking about, a +1. I had gone through the last 7 or 8 years and I determined what the bowl system pre-1998 would have done with the standings in college football each season.
Yeah.
And what would that +1 or +4 look like? And real quickly, before we get to that, Matt, I'm trying to push back against your 2 mega super duper cherry on top, I believe was the connotation there, 32 team conferences. But hey, to your point, where does the Big 12 go to get better? Where does the ACC go to get better? Because right now we're looking at SEC and maybe the Big 10's right here, and then it's
let me make one specific point. Let me make one specific point. John Wilner broke this story, and again, he's the best source journalist in the Pac-12. Like, he knows the inner workings of all this. And one thing that he had been saying the previous few weeks, he wasn't predicting any kind of USC move to the Big Ten, but one thing he was saying, he addressed Pac-12 expansion or realignment, and one of the things he's been saying the previous few weeks was, the Pac-12 is not going to add a school from Texas because of the institutional fit, because of the culture, and let's just be honest, the Roe v. Wade overturn. Like liberal Pac-12 schools are not going to bring in a Texas school with very different cultural values under these circumstances. So what does that mean, though? I'm not talking about whose politics are better or worse, just talking about the logistics and the politics here. The Pac-12 did not have an incentive to bring a Houston, a Texas Tech into the Pac-12 as part of a realignment move. So what does that mean? It means that the Pac-12 and Big 12, in my mind, are less likely, not more, to merge and form their own 16-team conference. So what that plays into the scenario of the Big 10 is going to gobble up a bunch of them, the SEC is going to gobble up a bunch of them, and you get the huge mishmash of 2 32-team conferences. I think the politics point toward just the SEC and Big 10 vacuuming everybody up rather than 4 entities with 14 to 16 or 18 teams. I think that's where the chessboard is. I think that's the state of play right now.
Next up, we've got a Notre Dame fan. Now, you talk about another angle on this. Will, how you doing today, sir?
What the heck is going on in college football, gentlemen? This is funky. I really feel for George Kliavkoff here. Like, he was really trying to do everything that he could to please Mike Bone, and he just could not please him enough. One thing as a Notre Dame fan I have to say is I'm intrigued on how UCLA and USC are going to do when they go to Ann Arbor, when they go to Madison, when they go to Minneapolis, because USC never wanted to play in South Bend in the winter, never wanted to. So that game always had to be earlier in the season. But now, like, they might not have the choice to do that. Now they might have to go to, like, a colder climate later in the season. So I'm just going to be interested in, like, how the Bruins and the Trojans, if they can do well and win games in the winter.
Can I just pick up on that, Will, very briefly? Yeah. I mentioned earlier in the show here that you're going to see USC, UCLA be on the road for like 3 weeks at a time, and then we'll be at home for 3 weeks at a time.
Okay.
I think what you're going to see is you're going to see USC go to the Eastern time zone or the Central time zone in September and especially October, and you're going to see the Big Ten schools make the extended double USC, UCLA double stack road trips in November. I think that's the easy scheduling adjustment for the conferences and all the parties involved here.
There's a great irony too in talking about the schedule, and I think, Mark, you and I have talked about this when I openly mocked UCLA's out-of-conference schedule for the next 2 years, especially this year, where they have Bowling Green, Alabama State, and South Alabama. That game against the HBCU exists because Michigan bailed out on its home and home with UCLA. They bought their way out of it because they wanted an extra home game for the next 2 years, which they got. So they're playing 8 at home and 4 on the road. Now they're going to be conference buddies pretty soon in the next few years and wind up having to play each other at some point. Look, I agree with Matt. I think there's going to be this is not going to be easy. It's going to be complex. It's going to be ugly. There are going to be mistakes. Look, the ACC this week came out with its, we're now eliminating the divisions, and you have your 3 matchups, right? And they couldn't even get the 3 matchups right across the board. I mean, some of what they have, Wake Forest was insistent, we have to keep that North Carolina State game.
Yep.
But instead, they decided the 3 rival games were Duke, Georgia Tech, and Virginia Tech. And those are your 3 annual, right? You didn't even get that right. Now we're talking about teams, and look, I get it. There are the private jets and there are all those things. And that's great if you're talking about, the men's basketball team with 13 people and a handful of coaches. You're talking about 100 football players, 85 or 80 going on the road. You're talking about the equipment trucks going all over, craziness. You're talking about a staff of 40 to 50. So to say, well, yeah, they got charter jets and whatever, it's not that simple. It really isn't. It's one thing to take your charter jet up to Eugene, Oregon. It's another thing to, have to go to Columbus or Ann Arbor and then turn around and whatnot. There's a lot of logistics that are not going to go smoothly.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. I saw that like Oklahoma and Texas didn't do that quite well in the Big 12 the year after leaving. I wonder if like the other schools are really going to have that extra push to like take down the Trojans, to take down the Bruins. Like a trip to Utah, like it might be really rough and wild. And
I will say this about USC under Lincoln Riley. USC will need to be 10 points better than its opponents. Because if it's leading by 4 points late in the game, that pass interference call by Pac-12 refs is going to go the other way.
I think here's to your point though, Will, is that yes, I get it, except the other schools, because I don't believe this is the end of the change. The other schools are almost auditioning for their next place also. Yeah. It's because I don't believe it's just UCLA and USC leaving, the rest, and the Pac-12 picks up a couple of, mid-range schools. And that's, then it's all fixed. You can't, not without a major market. Putting Boise State in is not adding a major market. And it's interesting too. One of the things the Pac-12 has always insisted upon for entrance into the conference is you must be a tier 1 Carnegie academic research school. And which is part of the reason BYU was not added in when Utah was. That would have made sense, BYU and Utah. BYU may be now, I haven't checked in the last month, whatever, but there's going to have to be some if you want to survive as a conference, you're going to have to be a lot more lenient about who's coming in and what they offer. You don't get to be so picky anymore.
Yeah,
Hey, Will, just want to offer this extra point that when Oklahoma was playing Oklahoma State in Bedlam, final game of the Big 12 season, trying to get into the Big 12 championship game, like every 50-50 call down the stretch of that game went to Oklahoma State. So I don't think it's idle speculation. Like, that the conference pariah is not going to get the benefit of the doubt.
Let me add to that though, Matt. It's Pac-12 officials. How could you tell if they were being any worse? They're Pac-12 officials. I think the bar is already so low you wouldn't be able to tell if they were doing a worse job.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Will, we appreciate you stopping by, man.
Yeah. I don't know. And one last point. I'm going to miss as a college football fan, I'm going to miss the Rose Bowl. Like that Penn State USC game as like a neutral, that was one of the funnest games I ever watched. And
I'm glad Keith Jackson's not alive to see this today.
Oh, you would not be happy.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Will.
Have a great one, guys.
You too.
Take care.
All right. Let's keep it moving on with the real MVP, our Kentucky fan.
Hello, everybody. How you doing?
We're doing great. Just make sure you tune me down in the background. We're hearing a lot of reverb.
Oh, sorry. I'll try working on it. Is it better? Let me go somewhere else. Sorry. So this is big news. My main question is, when do you think Notre Dame and Oregon are going to leave to join the Big Ten?
Well, I don't think Notre Dame necessarily thinks it has to move off its dime. Now, I mean, there will be a lot of speculation that it will just be folded into the Big Ten, but like Notre Dame is Notre Dame. It is unique in all of this, and Notre Dame prides itself on its independence and not being tied or tethered into anything else. I don't think we should assume that Notre Dame's going to just naturally be assumed into the Big Ten. I do think that Oregon, is definitely. I think the Pac-12 is dead. That's my initial inclination, because again, there's no reason for the Pac. Well, it's not likely that the Pac-12 and the Big 12 are going to merge, because the institutional and cultural fits are just so incongruent between those two conferences. I think just the Big 10 is going to get a mixture of schools from both conferences, and the SEC is going to get some Big 12 schools and a number of ACC schools. That's my read.
I think also to add to the Notre Dame part of it, while I understand most of the country hates Notre Dame, they don't like the arrogance, they don't like whatever. Look, I've been there for games. It is all of that when you're there. It really is. Deserves its place in college football history. Notre Dame just re-upped its contract with NBC. Notre Dame doesn't want to share that with 12 other conference partners when they have it all to themselves. There's no upside for Notre Dame doing it. There is also the Notre Dame legacy. And I realize, well, at one point I'm talking about this is the new world of college football. There are enough people in the Notre Dame legacy who remember when they wanted to join the Big Ten and were turned down because the Big Ten did not want a Catholic school. So there's a little bit of Notre Dame for another decade or so is going to be saying, stick it in your ear, you need us more than we need you.
Let me also make the point, Tony, on the heels of what you said. Yeah, if Notre Dame didn't want to split the revenue pie in a 14-team or 12-team conference, definitely not going to split the revenue pie in a 20-team conference, right?
No, I agree.
So, yeah, I think Notre Dame's going to stay independent.
I agree.
Okay, now do you think we're going to an NFL style where we get an AFC versus NFC type of situation in the future?
I do think that this offers college football a chance to reimagine how it schedules. I think that's an interesting piece of all this. One thing is, I'm big on flex scheduling, that you get to play, just one flex scheduled game every year, like in the middle of November. You play the first 6-7 weeks of the season, you see which teams are good, and then ESPN can just say middle of October, okay, and we have these prearranged dates in mid-November, where what are set aside for flex games. I think you get an even better opportunity to do that. I also think that the conference championship game, with having these, if you do have mega conferences, the idea of having a conference championship game, that goes away. You should just have conference championship Saturday, that first Saturday in December. Everybody should be playing a game now, from the various conferences. You have so many more opportunities to have, team number 1 in the SEC play team number 2 in the Big Ten, vice versa, flip it around. You're not going to have a Pac-12 championship game. Like even if the Pac-12 survives, who cares now under this reimagined chessboard? You should just have basically kind of a playoff play-in round with that conference championship Saturday, that conference championship weekend. So I also think that this deals a real blow to the conference championship games as we know it. Many things to kind of wrap your head around here.
Which is ironic with the conference championship game issues, especially if you look at the Pac-12, when George Kliavkoff brought it to his home city of Las Vegas. And we've all been convinced, at least I have, most people I know, that the Pac-12 headquarters were going to move to Vegas at some point because the basketball championship was there, the football championship. Kliavkoff still lives there. It's interesting, though. You use the word reimagine, and I was talking to someone earlier on another show that was part of the hiring of Kliavkoff, someone who was not an insider. It was part of the hiring of Brett Yormark to run the Big 12, not a college football insider, because everything is evolving, everything is changing. The hiring someone who spent every time a conference commissioner's job opens up, everyone is talking Oliver Luck. And certainly it would have made sense for the Big 12. But I think that these conferences wanted to start looking at We need to look at business. We need to look at the business of college football, not just college football. It's ironic then that, about 6 hours after I make that comment, the Pac-12 is blowing up on Kliavkoff's watch. And I agree, it's not his fault, but it's going to be his legacy nonetheless.
Hey, the real MVP, appreciate you stopping by, man. We're going to get to some other calls. Thanks, man.
No problem, Mark.
Next up, we got Tim on the line. Tim, a USC guy, as Matt well knows. Tim, how you taking this?
I'm taking it great. I'm loving it. Actually, you guys didn't notice I'm actually here live in Indianapolis. Actually just outside Indianapolis, and a Meyer pulled over. You guys probably didn't know that I was actually a part of this whole process. Just to make sure it was okay.
The Indianapolis, the site of a future USC conference championship game, maybe.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, you don't see Meyer in Southern California very often. No, I just wanted to pull over because I thought this might happen eventually, but I did not think it would happen this quickly. I thought we'd probably take more than just UCLA with us. And I was kind of hoping that we'd get maybe Oregon and Washington as well. But I wrote in the chat, I have a couple words for you guys. Midwest O-lineman. I cannot wait to recruit up in the Midwest because that was our missing piece. Now we're going to have a lot. And I think that we're going to have a lot of games in November. I mean, I know there's a good advantage for the Midwest schools, but I think a lot of rich alumni in Illinois and Michigan and Ohio are going to want to be somewhere in California in November instead of sitting out in the Midwest. So again, I think that might be an incentive for us to get our nice warm games later in the year. But my battery's about to die, and I'm getting back on the road. I'm still about an hour out of Chicago. But
yeah,
I'll
see, Big Ten teams going to Southern California in November. It's basically going to replace the Rose Bowl, basically.
Well, now they get to play in the Rose Bowl every year, some of these teams, so that'd be great for them. So, all right, guys, thank you so much. I'm excited. I'll keep listening on the way up.
Appreciate it, Tim.
It's interesting talking about recruiting. One of the things USC has historically done well, and I don't know if this will really change it, going to the point of, half of your games being somewhere in the Midwest, regardless of, when and where you're playing them. So one of the things USC has traditionally done well is recruit the Polynesian players, the Samoans, the kids from the islands, who, you move to Southern California, it's all good. You look at the schedule and, I keep using this example, you're playing Rutgers in, October. Wow. That's a harder sell to make, frankly.
Because when you're pulling two all the way across the country, this is different geographically and logistically than what the SEC is contending with, where you can say, okay, now we just have this really gangly big conference, but they're in contiguous states, so we can separate them into pods. And sure, Missouri's going to have to go to Georgia. Well, they already do. Bad example. Oklahoma's going to have to run to South Carolina, but we can do that infrequently because we can section off the conference geographically. But when it's only USC and UCLA and they're going all the way across the country for everything.
You also look to that point, you look at what is, and I think Matt brought this up before, is, looking at taking guesses at what's next, because trying to be educated about it is, an absurdity. Takes a certain amount of hubris to think that, we all know what's coming next. But if you look at, the raid that's going to happen on the ACC, at the next stop, you look at Clemson going to the SEC. You look at North Carolina, maybe, whomever, Miami, Florida State. So again, to your point, Mark, it still at least keeps up that regional part of it, even though you've had to expand to, Texas and Oklahoma to have your conference footprint. Yeah. It's still, at least you can look at a map and see the configuration and the alignment of it.
And it keeps the travel strain infrequent.
Correct.
You divide the conference in such a way that you make those trips infrequent versus USC, UCLA. They're on an island.
Right. No matter what you're doing, it doesn't take that much effort to get Ole Miss down to College Station. It's not that big a deal. It really isn't, or Texas to, get out to, to Alabama or, whatever, in Baton Rouge, whatever you want. It's not that big of a deal as compared to the model we're talking about, which is, again, then we leap to, you take some more teams, whether it's Oregon, Washington, whomever else, and you start to enlarge. Again, I don't like it, but it is what it is. There's no point in me, being Don Quixote and tilting at windmills.
Okay, Tony, so you're in ACC country.
I
And
am.
the thought occurred to me just as I listened to you talk. It occurs to me that, and remember, Jim Delaney wanted North Carolina and Duke in the Big Ten.
Yep.
So it seems to me actually that North Carolina and Duke, if we're thinking about mega conferences and realignment, North Carolina and Duke probably are more likely to go to the Big Ten than the SEC.
I would say definitely Duke. And we're going to chalk that up to the academic proclivities of Duke and a better fit in the end. I'm not slamming anyone in the SEC, so don't anyone get. I don't want any Mark's fans getting upset.
Just plotting out the politics,
right? Here. Exactly. Duke is a logical fit in the Big Ten. North Carolina, maybe. You're going to get a bunch of schools in the ACC. And I will tell you, being out here and. While I was making phone calls, I was on a local radio show out here for a short spell as I was, breaking speed laws, trying to get here to do Mark's show. Jim Phillips is taking a real beating out here because the ACC TV contract is abysmal, and you didn't step up. You didn't keep your promise to make this, a real player. And look, the ACC needs Clemson to be good, to be that top level conference. We saw what happened last year with Pitt and Wake Forest in the conference championship game, and 2/3 of the country ignored it. It was a pretty good game with some very good talent, but it wasn't Clemson. So the ACC's got some real challenges out here, and I will tell you from the locals out here, Jim Phillips is the one taking the beating.
Duke actually, based on my evaluation of that new ACC schedule, got the best.
Yeah, they did.
The 3 selections for the primary opponents.
They got they got logical ones. They basically don't ever have to leave Tobacco Road.
No, they don't. We've got so we've talked all the components of the obvious connection to the schools and conferences that are being most impacted and affected. But by extension, we talked a little Notre Dame with a Notre Dame fan. And now we got Eric as a Oregon fan. And now that leaves them kind of on an island as a power program brand that's stuck up there in the Northwest kind of by themselves, along with Washington to a certain extent. So, Eric, what do you think about this?
I mean, I don't think we're stuck up here. We're pretty happy. But okay. Yes, we are. I don't want to. I agree with all the people concerned with athletes traveling that much. Not just poor athlete, but just what about me? What happens to like the value of I don't want to pay for a ticket to go across the country to see, us play Rutgers or USC play Rutgers or whatever. So I'm not, but also more pressing than that, I'm just concerned with the conference. What is Oregon going to do? Because they don't have a ton of options. I mean, the Big Ten is an option. Mm-hmm. And then other than that, I mean, trying to add to the Pac-12, I don't know what you're going to pick up to make it. I mean, with USC, especially with their projected strength right now, what we just lost as a conference is devastating,
I think that's true. I think Oregon has a benefit, we'll call it the beauty mark, that other schools in the conference who don't know what's next, that they don't have.
Yeah.
Oregon has the facilities. Oregon has Phil Knight. Oregon is going to be attractive to whether it's the Big Ten, and whether you want to go to the Big Ten or not is, a whole other question. But there will be suitors for Oregon that there won't be for the other schools. No one's going to be clamoring to go sign up Arizona State. They're just not.
No, and I think that's why I think the more I'm processing this, which is it's a lot. I've been thinking about the bowl games and the travel and the rivalries and what does this mean? I think we essentially, if Oregon wants to stay, I mean, I guess this would mean Oregon turning against Klyavkov, right? Like this would be, if Oregon left, Klyavkov would be in a whole mess of trouble, I imagine.
Be out of a job pretty much. And Oregon is a bit of a wild card, because the president of the university at Oregon tends to be unique. Yeah, right. Look, and I've talked to him and done interviews, and Mark knows, we've talked about it when they went through the COVID things, and there's a Zoom meeting with the media, and everyone's got on, they had an AD, they had Ray Anderson from Arizona State, they had on a player rep, they had on a coach rep, and they had Michael on, and he's got his tweed jacket on, and it's like, and his point was, we're okay. This was back when they were talking about canceling the season. He was like, we're okay with it. The players will spend their time going to the library and studying more, and it's like, yeah, come on, back here in reality land, but yet he holds clout within the Pac-12. Because he was one of Klyavkov's guys early on to head some of the subcommittees to look at how things were going. And that was kind of a holdover from the Larry Scott era. So, I think Oregon has some chips in its back pocket that other schools don't have. It's just a matter of how they want to utilize them.
Yeah, someone's going to pick us up, right? Someone's going to hit on us.
It's a matter of what you want. It's a matter of what Oregon wants out of it. How much money does Oregon want? How much,
Well, as much as Schill is, he's very Eugene. He fits in great here. But Rob Mullins, our athletic director, is very aggressive.
Yes.
And has an excellent track record at Oregon and I believe Kentucky before that.
There are schools that are going to be left on the side of the street when the Pac-12, starts, and when it's a game of musical chairs, right? At this point, and who can get what, and it's not going to surprise anyone if the music stops and Arizona State don't have chairs.
I mean, they should be Mountain West schools at this point, anyway.
Well, they probably should be, and you can see Colorado going to the Big 12.
They used to be. I mean, they were in the WAC before they joined the Pac-10 in 1978.
Colorado used to be part of the old Big 8 before it became the Big 12, so it's we talked about it earlier when I mentioned that I did that sit down with John Curry at Wake Forest talking about all these shifts, and he said, you have to be of a certain age to remember there used to be the Southwest Conference and the Pac-8 and the Big 8 and so on and so forth, and everything shifted and college football survived. It's just it's pain. Some of the moves are painful sometimes for those of us who kind of get used to things the way they are.
Does this seem that you guys have watched more college football than I have? Is this a bigger siege? Because this feels monumental. All the things going on with NIL and is this bigger than any change that's occurred maybe in your lifetime in the sport?
Yes, because again, the bowl system's dead, the Rose Bowl's dead. The Pac-12's probably dead. I mean, this really is a death knell for so many of the things that we've loved and cherished and have gotten used to over several decades. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma was a move where, okay, you're seeing the chessboard changing, but we were still in an in-between place. We could have gone in a different direction. We could have gone another way. But this is a point of no return. There's no saving the pre-existing structure. You know that you're going to have either 4 16-team super conferences or a couple 32-team or maybe 24-team super duper conferences. There's no turning back after this.
Let me add on to what Matt just said, being the oldest guy in the room here and remembering back in the days when, they had to banish the Southwest Conference because every team in there was corrupt. They just had to set fire to the entire conference. The Big 8, but the thing is, a lot of those schools moved to the Big 8. Some of them moved to the SEC. Schools moved around, right? But you still had the Cotton Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the Rose Bowl. You still had all of those elements that existed. And I agree, while we don't know what's going to happen to the Rose Bowl, if there is no Pac-12, and the Big Ten is, 24 teams or whatever it is. I don't know how you salvage those things. So I think the change that is going to come from this over the next 2 to 3 years will make it the biggest change that we have seen in college sports.
Hey, Matt, we know you need to take off. Is there anything else you'd like to hit us with before we see you next time?
Well, I think the main thing to leave you with is something I briefly alluded to at the beginning. When Mike Bone courted Lincoln Riley, was a Big Ten move part of the plan? That's the question I want to see answered, and it's really going to be one of the major talking points and discussion points of the next several days. So I'm just going to leave you with that. And obviously at Trojans Wire, hey, my hair's all messed up. Like, I did yard work, then I saw Wilner's tweet, and just 2 hours of straight writing. I know I'm not going to eat or drink a single thing for the next 10 hours. So it's off to writing more stories and doing more media hits. So thanks, Mark, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Matt, knowing all that, and I already was going to say, we appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you so much for being here, Matt. Trojans Wire, everyone. Head on over there. Check out Matt's work.
And great to meet you, Tony. Great to talk to you.
You too, Matt. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, Tony. Likewise, however much time you have or don't have for us, Tony.
I'm good right now. I canceled my plans for the night because once this hit, I was like, man, I got a lot of work to do. So we're good. If we need to take more calls or whatever, I'm good for a while longer.
About 800 folks on the line. Appreciate you all being here at the Voice of College Football. Wow. Thank you so much for that. Eric, anything else before we let you go and keep moving on?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I was going to point out before Matt jumped in or jumped off, I guess, just processing all of this. The biggest loss I see, like in terms of tradition, are just like the rivalries that you lose. Mm-hmm. If Oregon goes to the Big Ten, which I assume they're meeting as we speak, or if there's not already a plan in place, they're running around with their hair on fire. All the people in the athletic department. If they do move to the Big Ten, we just automatically lose UW and Oregon State as rivalries, hypothetically. I mean, they could do something where they schedule them every year, but that's kind of how rivalries die, if I'm not mistaken. So that's just sad to me. And I don't know. I'm going to have to think about this a lot before I know one way or the other how I feel about it.
We all are. We're all processing it, minute by minute since the news broke.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Got Hunter checking in. Hunter, please let us know who you root for, or at least where you're calling from.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Doing just fine.
You should know who I root for by now.
Oh, Hunter. Yes. From Alabama.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
So,
appreciate you being here.
So, as an SEC guy, looking in on this, what are your thoughts on this move, just on the face value of the move? Good, bad, indifferent? What's your kind of y'all's take?
Good for who? Good for the Big Ten, yes. Good for USC and UCLA when it comes to money and football brand, yes. Good for college football, in my estimation, depending on what transpires in the future, most likely no. And I think that's the disconnect. Before I let Tony chime in, I think that's a big disconnect that separates college athletics from professional leagues. There is somebody, a commissioner, and by extension committees, to oversee the entire sport, to think about the entire sport and what is best for the entire sport when they make decisions, as opposed to we've got a situation where we've got 5 major conference commissioners, and they're going to do what's best for their conference monetarily, first and foremost, and with other priorities in mind after that. But there's no one to oversee the entire sport, to look out for the entire landscape.
No, I think that's absolutely correct. And one of the things I was looking for down the road before this happened was in the replacing of Mark Emmert. I was looking for someone to be not an NCAA president, but more of a commissioner for everything, not, like we see the conference commissioners. and be more of that role that, dealt less with some of the minutia that Mark Emmert got himself tied up in, and more big picture, forward thinking, reimagining kinds of things. I had a conversation off the record with an ACC athletic director about 7-8 days ago, and I asked him, because the person the person knows the landscape really well. They know Greg Sankey really well. Says, Greg Sankey the most powerful person in college sports? He didn't really want to answer that, but he said Greg Sankey's got the most difficult job in college sports because he's got the most powerful conference, but with such a diverse group of schools, diverse needs and diverse pull. But yet you look at what just happened. Last summer, there was Greg Sankey was going to be able to push the SEC model for a playoff through with not really much in the way of stopping him. And then the ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12 formed this alliance, which really was to serve as a voting bloc. They would all vote in unison. The alliance lasted a year, and the alliance is now breaking up because the ACC's got to look out for its best interest now. And, the different schools in there, it's not even now about looking out for your best interest as a conference. Each school is now looking out for its best interest. We may be seeing the end of the Pac-12. So, the alliance may have slowed Sankey down. Turns out it didn't really stop him.
It seems like we just have a domino effect now.
Yeah.
with Texas and Oklahoma moving to the SEC, and it just seems that this has just triggered a frenzy of conference move around, and I think that was some unintended consequences of that move.
I think what I have seen in the last year of college sports, college football in particular, is nothing but unintended consequences of things. I think the transfer portal wound up with a bunch of unintended consequences. While I favor players being able to control their own destiny, there were a bunch of unfortunate unintended consequences because it wasn't managed properly. The transfer portal came into being right around the same time NIL came into being. Tomorrow's the 1-year anniversary of NIL being legal. And so the two are forever intertwined when they shouldn't be, when they really should be two separate things. The unintended consequences of NIL turned into schools having collectives, which I will tell you is I am 1,000% in favor of NIL, and I absolutely despise the collectives because they don't act in the purity of what NIL was intended to be. So I think we have seen, and a domino effect, I think, is a good way to put it. It is a domino effect, and it's hard to keep on top of. I saw someone earlier today say, "Man, I can't wait until September when we have actual games." And I thought that over the past couple of years, but I've come to the conclusion that nothing is ever going to happen in a vacuum again for the next 3 to 4 years until we've reached a new level of plateau with wherever everybody's going to wind up.
Well, I agree with Mark in saying that we need some sort of a commissioner over the whole sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should vote Mark in for that position.
Mark's got my vote, but let me add to this. I have talked with college football coaches who are in favor of exactly that. Football having its own commissioner because its interests, its financial acuity, and what it means to the schools financially really is different than what the other sports do and how they are run. And I have talked to, in the last year, I've talked to no fewer than 6 college football coaches who advocate for the same thing. A couple of them have been willing to throw their name into the hat to be, it's only because they don't know Mark.
I also think that we need a regulatory committee or something to deal with the issues like you just spoke about NIL and the transfer portal and all that. We need to have some sort of a regulation that when it comes to this, because or else this circus is never going to end.
I agree with that. And Mark and I have talked about it extensively. We've talked about it over with my group where I've got a whole bunch of riders positioned across the country. And I'm fortunate with our group in that at our disposal, we also have a couple of contract lawyers and an NCAA compliance officer from a university at our disposal that we bounce stuff off of and go big picture conversation on. So let me get to what you're talking about. I agree. I think that the transfer portal to me had one big problem. There was no window to it. There is now. Obviously, you have May 1st to declare to be eligible for the next year for football. There wasn't that to begin with. It was like a 24/7 fast food place where you could just come and go as you wanted. And I had an issue with that. With regards to NIL and the regulation, the NCAA, and specifically Mark Emmert, failed at every possible juncture of that. They had years to see that this was going to happen. But Emmert was guilty of having so much hubris to think that he was going to win at the federal court system that he chose to do nothing. They had a chance to put regulation in place that would have been sweeping. The players would have gotten their money, they would have gotten their benefits, and everybody would have been okay because they were getting enough. But he was convinced he was going to win. And when the Supreme Court, who can't agree on their lunch orders, votes 9-0 against you and calls you a cartel, then you have lost in a big way. So what happens now, and I talked to Jay Billis about this, I want to say about 5-6 weeks ago, they're not, the NCAA doesn't worry about lawsuits now. They panic about lawsuits. They will sit and do nothing as opposed to run the risk of being sued. And so what they've done is they've gone to Congress saying we need national help. Well, look, I've studied politics all my life. I know it takes forever to get anything through Congress. And so now you have 29 states who have NIL legislation, which is all well and good, and they're all pretty similar. But then you have 22 that don't, that have nothing. Alabama actually rescinded its state NIL laws because the state legislature decided it was too confining in what we do in our recruiting. So they got rid of the law about 2 months ago. There should have been one national plan, and Mark Emmert, the NCAA in general, Mark Emmert specifically, is to blame for where we are right now with it.
Hunter, anything else you've got for us? Some reason. Oh, Hunter is
sorry about that.
That's quite all right. Anything else, Hunter?
No, other than just to say that I agree with what you just said there, and maybe down the road we'll have some type of a sweeping legislation that happens to where we can get this under wrap all into regulation, because I don't think it's good for the sport. I don't think it's good for the kids, and I don't think it's good for the universities and the coaches of those universities to have to put up with all this. I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Josh Pate, who does a show for 24/7 Sports.
Yep.
And he made a video about it. And I agreed with so much of what he said about the NIL specifically and how that he thought that it should be handled. And but anyway, I thank you for taking my call, Mark, and roll tide.
Thanks, Hunter. Appreciate that.
It's a great atmosphere down there, by the way, in Alabama. I've been to a game at Bryant-Denny. It's a great atmosphere.
Yes, it's been a while for me, but about 20 years back, I was there covering the SEC. So now we got Bruce on the line. Bruce, can you tell us either who you root for or where you're calling from?
I'm a Husker fan from Portland, Oregon. My question is, do you think Oregon or Oregon State will end up joining the Big Ten? And that's really all I got, man.
I think Oregon, yes. I think Oregon will get to call its shot, and the most logical place for it is the Big Ten. Oregon State, look, we talked way at the beginning of this about travel partners and the necessity to move in lines of two. USC wasn't going to go without UCLA or another, another Pac-12 school. Oregon needs that other Pac-12 school. I don't know that Oregon State really brings a lot to the table, though. We're talking mostly football and basketball, obviously, and I don't know that Oregon State brings a lot to the table, certainly not in terms of being a media market, certainly not in terms of long-standing success. I could see Oregon moving with Washington more than I could them moving with Oregon State.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce. We also have Steve Dace has answered the call as well. Steve Dace with a tremendous Michigan podcast, so please join him there. And I'm fortunate enough to be there. Remick, we see that you're on the line. We'll bring you on as soon as we get Steve's initial comments. Remick, we'll let you jump on so you can ask questions of Steve and of Tony. Steve Dace, Michigan podcast. Steve, how you doing today? Steve, we've got you muted for some reason. There we go. Go right ahead, or you've got yourself muted.
Yes, because I'm a moron. Hey, Mark. How are you?
Steve, how are you?
I'm good, man. Just living through a world-changing event. How are you?
Absolutely doing the same thing. So where do you start with all of this? How did it hit you? Were you expecting it? Because this was one of the moves that was suggested by many following Texas, Oklahoma at this point last summer.
I did not expect it when the news broke. I was in the middle of work. I mentioned it to a couple of my employees who are also big sports fans of Big Ten teams. One is an Iowa grad, the other Wisconsin, and they were beyond stunned. And I think, there was a lot made last year about the commissioner of the SEC joining with, I've known Bob Bowlesby for a long time. As you know, Mark used to be involved in sports media, used to be my day job. He was the athletic director at the University of Iowa. I've known Bob Bowlesby for 20 years, the now retiring commissioner of the Big 12. And Bob is a very straight shooter, very no nonsense, no BSer at all. And so to be working arm to arm with the commissioner of the SEC and the AD at Notre Dame and a couple of others on this college football playoff expansion plan, announce it, and then like a couple of weeks later, it turns out that while he was working with you, the commissioner of the SEC was getting ready to raid your cornerstones and deconstruct your league. Well, Jim Delaney created modern college administrator ruthlessness. I mean, if you know the story of where the Big Ten Network came from, he didn't like his negotiations with ESPN, thought they were lowballing him. They told him, hey, go form your own, what are you going to do, form your own network? And he's like, you know what? Maybe I will. And he did. And everybody said it wouldn't work. And now here we are. It changed the landscape of college sports. And as ruthless, though, as what Jim Delaney was, this is what Kevin Warren has done here is next level. Mm-hmm. This is beyond savage. This is, let me form an alliance with a century-old strategic partner. All right, the Big Ten and the Pac-10 and now 12 have been strategic partners. They formed when the College Football Association was formed in the 80s after the Supreme Court opinion that deregulated television. They did their own thing. They have been de facto co-conferences our entire lives. Mm-hmm. And so to form this alliance to create a voting block to hold off big SEC, ESPN hegemony over the new playoff, and then turn around and raid their league of their cornerstones. Let me tell you right now, Jim Phillips, who Kevin Warren beat for the job of commissioner of the Big Ten. Jim Phillips, the longtime AD at Northwestern. A lot of people thought that was Jim Delaney's handpicked choice to be a successor, and the league went with Kevin Warren instead. And Phillips is now the head of the ACC. Dude, look both ways for you cross the street, bro. That would be my advice, because I got to imagine the conversations even before the Big Ten calls. Remember, Mark, Delaney wanted to destabilize the Big Ten or the ACC in the last round of expansion. The goal was to bring in, that's why Maryland was brought in, to bring in Virginia, to bring in North Carolina, to bring in Georgia Tech, these other elite AAU academic universities that are, and expand the footprint. And then the ACC got enough money that then brought in Miami and some others that it didn't do that. Well, I mean, can you imagine what's going on? I mean, you used to work for ESPN, Mark, and then you know how this works. What in the world is going on with in Clemson, South Carolina, South Bend, Indiana, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Charlottesville, Virginia? those administrators right now are thinking, we got to get a spot here to sit down, before the music stops.
Mhm.
I think Notre Dame is cornered. I think Notre Dame will also, I'm going to make this prediction right now. Notre Dame will also be playing in the Big Ten by 2024. I don't think there will be, with this much of consolidation, I don't know where their national schedule comes from. I mean, USC is going to play all these Big Ten teams, and yeah, let's play Notre Dame. No, they're not. Yeah, I mean, so where is their schedule going to come from? I think the minimum of how this turns out is that long rumored 4 super conferences. That will be the least stabilizing outcome of this. At this point, that seemed like a year ago to be like, wow, that would be earth shaking. I would pray for that now. That'll be the least amount of existential levels of change we see. More than likely, you're looking at an AFC NFC with the SEC and the Big Ten, and there will still be all these universities playing because you got to have TV revenue and inventory. So they're going to want MAC games and these other games, but they will absolutely be playing like a different sport. They're cannon fodder now. They will officially be cannon fodder later. And I think the big decision that's going on right now in places like Eugene, Oregon, is, where they have all the Nike money, Stanford, which may have the largest endowment on planet Earth. I think those two places right now are deciding, where are we better off? Are we better off having a co-conference with what's left of the Big 12 and to make up for it in volume and essentially just own the space west of the Rockies? Or are we better off calling the Big Ten and say, why don't you, hey, the SEC got to 16 before you did. Why don't you get to 20 before they do? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know all the numbers. That's not my thing. But I'm pretty confident that those are the conversations happening in Palo Alto and Eugene and Seattle, Washington right now.
So unless Tony's got something for you, I've got one thing, and then we'll bring on a caller. Don't know how much time you have, but certainly we cherish every second, Steve, so jump off whenever you need to.
Okay.
But does culture and academics, when talking about some of these future moves that seem to be, I don't know if anything's logical at this point, but would prove to possibly be the next steps, does culture, academics get in the way of the money grabs that you're talking about and survival?
It depends. First of all, UCLA and USC are elite academic institutions. And so they fit in with the Big Ten. I mean, that's why there's been this alliance. That a lot of these Pac-12 schools are, Cal Berkeley is obviously one of the great public universities in the world. So that's why this was always such a strategic alliance, is because this was a consortium of conferences here, these two, that really took student athletes seriously. Stanford's a top 5 university in the entire continent. So academically, USC, this isn't bringing in Nebraska, which couldn't qualify to join the AAU, is ranked somewhere in the 180s as a university. Academically, these guys more than compete. They'll be in the top 3rd academically of Big Ten universities day one. You look at culturally, I just was looking at a demographic study before I logged on, that there are actually more Big Ten alums that live in Los Angeles and San Francisco than Chicago. Okay. So I don't think that will be an issue. Do I think there's a huge market for, I heard Sean Farnham say this on the radio, the UCLA former basketball player. What's the market for Northwestern UCLA basketball on a Thursday night? There won't be one. But what the hell is the market for UCLA Oregon State basketball on a Thursday night? There's not one of those either. So you might as well make $120 million a year while you're not having a market, So I don't think that really changes things too much. I don't know the academic profiles of Washington and Oregon, how they fit in. Obviously, Stanford would fit in. And if you're going to do 2 more, if you're the Big Ten and it's Notre Dame and Stanford, maybe you call it a day right there and say, we've got our 18. We have 2 private universities, or 3 now, with USC and Northwestern. So we've got 4 of those. People with traditional ties. There's a lot more traditional ties between, say, Notre Dame and USC and Stanford than there is, if you brought in Washington into that group. And maybe you call it a day and say, why, what's the point of splitting 500 million, 20 ways when we can split 480 million 18 ways, right? I don't know, but the game has changed for sure. And I think we're going to debate, for the rest of our lives, whether it had to or not. I think COVID, it has changed a lot of this, the hole that it put a lot of these universities in with the decisions that they were making to try not play with fans, things of that nature. And then you have a recession right after that, Mark. So we go from COVID to, we're on the brink of a recession right now. We'll likely have one in the next quarter. And then inevitably, I can't pay my bills. If I'm UCLA, I'm 62. A good buddy of mine is a high-ranking official at UCLA within their athletic department. And he just put it to me plainly in an email. We're $62 million in the hole, man.
It's actually $100 million now.
Is it 100 million? Yeah.
Yep. It's up to 100 million.
So there won't be, this won't be Chip Brown put out a report that Texas is going to join the Pac-10 tomorrow, and ESPN comes in and says, "Oh snap, we don't want Fox to get that. So let us give them the Longhorn Network and try to hold on and keep Texas in the Big 12." There's no angel donor left. All that took place pre-cut the cord. These large linear networks are not sitting on piles of cash any longer. So this is it. I don't know, where the angel donor, the Miss Havisham, comes in here at the last minute to restore sanity and stop this from happening. And I'll just say this: I don't want this to happen. I'm not a fan of this. I know how this will end. I'm getting to be 50 years old in a couple of years. I don't want to learn TikTok. I don't want to learn Instagram. Okay. I love tradition. I miss the old 9 bowl games on New Year's Day pre-BCS. Right. I'd go back to that if it was up to me. All right. I'm a Gran Torino college football fan. That's where I'm at. I am not a fan of this, but I also am not into magical thinking. And this is the world in which we live now. And it's hard to turn down the opportunity to become solvent overnight.
I think that's one of the things that we were talking about earlier is the only reason for this move is financial. There is really nothing else compelling it. You have to wonder, while, everyone who follows college football felt the earth was shaking last year with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, and then who's going to replace them? Is the Big 12 going to survive? And then the Big 12, and there was all this adjustments. And Kliavkoff stood pat and said, we don't need to expand the Pac-12. Mm-hmm. And I got it. I understood it, because when you look at the teams that would have been viable, that qualify for the Pac-12 academically, again, going back to what we said earlier, the Pac-12 has a statute that you must be a Carnegie Tier 1 academic research school. The pickings were relatively slim. I think I had put together a thought that they could have Houston, SMU, Rice, and I don't even know who the fourth one was. If they had expanded, would we be here now? I don't know. The Pac-12 network has been a financial drain on the conference for well over a decade. And Kliavkoff all but alluded to the fact that it'll be gone next year. When the contracts with the service providers are up, it'll be gone. None of the schools ever got the money that Larry Scott committed to them from that endeavor. It was always a bust. So you go and like we just talked about, UCLA is $100 million in debt, and that's before we get to the current academic year. The revenue for the 2021-22 academic year will be released in about 3-4 months. So they're already $100 million in debt, with improvements to facilities that they had to take on some of the costs for, the buyouts of Steve Alford and Jim Mora, the loss of game day revenue during COVID, the loss of TV revenue, all of those things. And there is no angel to come in and fix that at this point. We talked about it earlier. The school there's always been, with Chancellor Gene Block, there's always been this division, this wall between the administration and the athletic department, and the two don't cross. Up until Martin Jarman became athletic director, I never saw Gene Block at a UCLA athletic event. All the years I covered football at the school, Chancellor was never there. Martin Jarman drags him by the hand at this point to make sure that he goes to some of these and is a presence. But the school is not going to bail out the athletic department, much like Cal had about a $12 to $15 million deficit. The school said, we'll cover it. The UCLA administration will not do it. They've given them low interest loans, which seems absurd. But this is it. This is, if you're UCLA, this is your chance. Get a piece of the Big Ten TV contract. And this is what you got. Otherwise, you're just hoping to chip away at your debt level every year for the next 5 years.
We've got a call coming in from Remick. Remick, appreciate you being here. Who do you root for, or where are you calling from?
Calling from Salt Lake City.
Hello, Remick.
Hey, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, appreciate you being here. What do you have for Steve and Tony and I?
Well, this is a big move. I'm a big Utes fan, so this kind of affects me and our team and the conference, So I don't know what to think of it. This is pretty big news. However, I feel like in the future, do you think that one of the Power 5 conferences will be no more, like it's gone, and like the Big 12 or Big 12, it's going to be like these two major, like just two conferences together? And do you think, is that where we're going?
Yeah, I
It
think
appears
so.
as we're going that. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable, because in order for this move to continue to work for UCLA and USC, that there's got to be other schools that leave the Pac-12 also. Frankly, I got to tell you, I'd like to see Utah. I don't know what happens to Utah. I would like to see Utah get some upgrade, some bump up in notoriety. As Mark and I have talked about, he knows. I think Kyle Whittingham is one of the best college football coaches in the country. It's not an easy place to recruit to, and yet what he does with the talent that he has every year, I think is exceptional. So what I like, if we're gonna shift around and create this whole new world, then I'd like to see Utah. I also think that you're going to see some ACC teams move. I think that Clemson, Florida State have to start looking out for their best interest, not sit there and wait for Jim Phillips, who living out here in North Carolina now, I can tell you he's getting run over by the bus pretty much every day lately. So yeah, I think that it will dissolve some of the other conferences, and there'll be some more seismic shifts. I gotta tell you, Mark, while we're doing this, I just got a text from a source who, gotta tell you, I trust pretty well, who said that the USC and UCLA deal being done, and the all the intricacies still to be ironed out, but the move is being done, that there are 2 to 4 more Pac-12 teams who are ready to move to the Big Ten, probably within the next week.
Oh,
I can see those.
So do you think Utah is
I can
one of
see
them?
Oregon not being one of those teams. I could see it actually being Stanford and
I feel
Cal.
like Utah's better fit for the Big
I was
12.
just going to say, Steve, Stanford, Cal if it's 2, and you don't think Stanford, Cal, Oregon, Washington if it's 4?
I think if it's 4, then it's Oregon and Washington. I think academically, I mean, what this does from the Big Ten footprint standpoint, you could make an argument competitively. Why bring Oregon and Washington in? Why you're going to basically monopolize the California recruiting market with your conference if you do this? Why have Oregon come in and compete with your schools for that with their Nike money? Just take that money completely off the table in an NIL world and just go straight academics with Cal and Stanford. Remember, I don't believe the Big Ten's presidents will sign off on abandoning elite academic AAU institutions like that. I don't think they'll sign off on it. I don't. I would be more. That's why I would guess it's more likely to be Stanford and Cal than Oregon and Washington.
I think it's going to be hard to get Stanford to move. Is not that Stanford is going to have a lot of options, but Stanford's administration tends to be very slow and methodical. And these are decisions that are happening now. They're decisions that are happening tonight, tomorrow. Everyone, as we've used this analogy multiple times since the news broke, it's a game of musical chairs, and everyone's got to make sure they've got a chair before the music stops. And Stanford doesn't historically operate that way. So it makes sense to have Stanford and Cal, again, talking about the travel pairing. I don't know if Stanford can pull the trigger that quickly.
I don't know. See, when the old Big 12 was formed, the reason that Baylor was included, Now, it's since become an athletic powerhouse, obviously, in multiple sports. But the reason it was originally included when it was in one of its worst periods in the history of its football program and was really irrelevant in every other sport is because a lot of prominent members of the Texas state legislature, including the governor of the time, were Baylor grads. And so you get into the internal political mechanisms here, all right? And so I don't know the answer to this. I don't know, in the state of Washington, how many members of the legislature are Cougars? Are they going to sit there and just sign off on Washington State getting left behind while Washington goes on and moves in? See what I'm saying? Those are all going to be considerations. That's another reason why I said Stanford and Cal, similar to UCLA and USC, they're linked together as rivals, similar academic profiles. They fit exactly what the Big Ten is about. We already mentioned San Francisco. There are more Big Ten alums that live in the San Francisco area than in Chicago or Detroit. So that was another reason why I suggested that it could be them instead of Oregon and Washington.
No, and there's all the logic in the world to it. There really is. It's not Stanford's administrative history to move this quickly and this decisively on something. So again, it makes perfect sense. And from a media market, you're getting the Bay Area, you're getting the San Francisco media market, which would be huge for the Big Ten. It's just a matter of how quickly Stanford's ready to move. Oregon, they can do whatever they want. Call Phil Knight, get the rubber stamp of approval, and you move on. But look, from the message I just got, there will be 2 to 4 more teams moving by the end of next week.
All right.
So
Can I chime in?
Earlier, I'm sorry. What's that, Remick?
I just said, can I chime in for a second?
Absolutely.
So if it's the 4 teams, I can see that, just randomly Stanford, Cal, Oregon, and Washington. And because Utah left its rival, BYU, in the Mountain West back in the day, we didn't have a rival going into the Pac-12. We were just the lone sum, right? And they were trying to make Colorado and Utah a rival, which it's not really. If anything, it's Oregon and Utah, or USC and Utah. But why not just have the Big 12 do something? Since the Pac-12 didn't expand, why not Big 12? Hey, here's an opportunity to take some teams. Let's grab Utah. Let's get Utah on the phone. Bring back the Holy War into the conference, right? And grab Colorado again. Seeing that Pac-12 could die off in the next coming years, right?
I'm sure. So as someone that has covered the Big 12 quite a bit, I live in Iowa. I've got a lot of friendships at Iowa State University, so I'm very familiar with that environment. I am positive that the Big 12 is thinking that. Here's the problem: is it goes to forgive me, Mark. I forgot the other Tony.
You're with us.
Okay. The timing is terrible for the Big 12.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Bowlesby retiring. They're about to hire a new commissioner literally any minute now, and he's coming from Jay-Z's organization. So you want to talk about drinking from a fire hose? They're in the middle of a transition right now. So the timing for them is not good. And, a lot of us have sat around here for the last month wondering what in the world is the holdup with the Big Ten announcing its television deal? What in the world is the holdup with the Big Ten announcing the new scheduling model? Well, now I think you have your answer, that this was the holdup. This was going on. And you start looking at what the Big Ten is looking at with this. You're talking about 4 native primetime windows now from noon Eastern till 10 Eastern. They will have, and that will be spread over several networks. And I'm going to guess one of them won't be ESPN. You'll have Fox. I think they'll bring CBS in, who will be looking for inventory after losing the SEC. I could see one of those windows, particularly if I'm right and Notre Dame now joins the Big Ten by 2024. That's part of it as well. There's one of those windows is on NBC after the Notre Dame game. And then, of course, you have a 10 o'clock game late on the West Coast. We're talking about really a printing press here. The question is what's the grief to profit ratio? And in the end, is it good and healthy for the sport overall? And I suspect it's not, but I also am not sure if it's because, like I told you guys a few minutes ago, I'm the Gran Torino college football fan now. Okay. So it might be great for the sport. It may just not be good for me. Okay.
I think it's going to be good for some schools, and it's going to be good for the Big Ten Conference. I don't think it's going to be good for the game overall. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about this, Steve, before you jumped on, and I got to think you're in the same boat, but I'll let you speak for yourself. This obviously would all be handled much differently if there was somebody overseeing the entire sport,
Absolutely.
like a commissioner that's looking out for the best interests of the entire sport and not just a conference or a particular school. It's a completely different structure than what we see in the NFL and the professional sports, where the greater good is taken into account.
Correct. And what's happened here, we've always had NIL. It was just under the table. Okay. It was a $500 handshake from the booster, and come by my car lot, sign a few autographs, and maybe test drive one of those things off my lot for a semester. Okay. I mean, that's typically what it was. All right. And this is what the whole Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban thing was about. What's happened in the last year is two events have occurred that kind of took this the honor among thieves. College football is like baseball with a lot of unwritten rules, unofficial rules, and two events occurred that kind of, you went Salazzo brother, if you know my Godfather reference. All right, we had an acceptable amount of crime here. All right, everybody had a good time. We weren't breaking up families. We weren't ruining neighborhoods. And all of a sudden the Salazzos move in and want to start slinging cocaine. And that kind of stuff just creates ghettos and ruins societies. And Beto puts his foot down and says, we're not doing that. That's going too far. And it leads to a civil war. What happened here was when A&M went full beyond in open recruiting inducement and then advertised it. And that's what Nick Saban was complaining about. That's when Ryan Day's telling his boosters, I'm going to need like $13 million to hold this recruiting class together. Because it's now out in the open. Everybody, it's the number one factor in recruiting this cycle is NIL, number one. And so the under the table stuff now is way over the table. That's number one. And so that unwritten rule is gone. And so now you've got this massive emerging market with this huge underserved and underpaid labor force that is now all saying, all right, dude, my turn. Okay, that's just simple market economics. The other is when the SEC turned right around after announcing the playoff expansion and raided Oklahoma and Texas because, it was poor or something. Okay. And when they did that, I think that's when whatever, we didn't really have a union here. It was more of a confederacy of these conferences loosely affiliated. All right. But realizing there was mutually assured destruction if you went too far and stepping to the other. And when they did that, though, I think that put us to DEFCON 1. It used to be in college football, the old motto from War Games, the movie when we were kids, the only way to win a nuclear war is not to play. And all of a sudden, the SEC launched a first strike. And everybody else, particularly there in suburban Chicago, decided, you know what? We're sitting here on quite an armory of weapons of mass destruction ourselves. Why are we just sitting here taking it? Why are we letting ESPN, SEC just completely take control of the sport? Why are we letting them expand the playoff in the ESPN exclusive negotiating window? So they're going to determine what teams get in with their coverage. They're going to televise all the games. That would be like if the Democrats allowed Fox News to have total control over broadcasting elections, or the Republicans said, yes, MSNBC be the only network that covers politics in America. You're not going to do that. All right. And so when the SEC did that, when they launched a first strike, that's when they went to DEFCON 1 there in suburban Chicago. And this is going to play itself out now, guys. I mean, we thought this was going to be the guns of August, a real quick war, temper tantrum. No, we're going to be sitting here in 3 or 4 years in trenches still lobbing mustard gas at each other. This thing's going on for a while. This is the alignment to end all alignments. That's what's happening here.
And before we allow Tony to take his parting shot, and Tony, we appreciate you being here for a long, long time.
Oh, sure.
There's going to come a tipping point in regards to mathematics here, because if we're talking about 2 teams leaving for the Big Ten, or we're talking about 4 from the Pac-12, then it becomes, okay, the Pac-12 is done, and the rest of those are just scurrying to the Mountain West or the Big 12, wherever they can survive. Hopefully for them, they're looking for the Big 12 to maintain Power 5 status, but then those moves are going to determine whether we stay with most likely a 4-team or 4-conference structure at the most, or it becomes this super mega duper 2 versus, the world, the SEC and the Big Ten. All right, Tony, anything else today?
Yeah, look, I mean, this was a shocker. I don't think anyone saw this coming today, this week, even before this season. This was a stunner. It's not the end of it. It's going to be ugly because it's going to be complicated. And you're going to see, I'm going to warn everyone, you're going to see in the digital media day, you're going to see tons of headlines that say this and say that. And I'm going to say about, at least a third of them are going to be wrong. If you're not digging through to the details, you're doing yourself a disservice. I had the conversation with someone earlier about the article that was run earlier this week from On3 about the Jaden Rashada, recruitment, and they had to pull it because it was totally wrong and completely unsourced. And yet you go on social media and you still see all the memes with people thinking Jaden Rashada is getting $9 million when there is no such deal. There is no such agreement. So I'm going to urge people, dig deep for the details because it's going to be complicated. This is not going to be an easy move for UCLA. It'll be slightly easier for USC being a private school. And it's not the end. It's look, Pac-12 Media Days is in 2 weeks. This is going to be really awkward. It was a bad time for me to move out of California, apparently.
And Tony, at first sight, it's difficult to decipher what's ridiculous anymore. That used to be easy. You could say, okay, well, that's not going to happen. That's ridiculous. Okay, let's get down to the 3 or 4 logical solutions or ways this could go. Well, now it's who knows.
Now the absurd can be true just as long as it can be backed up. Dig for the facts, dig for the details. That's where you're going to find your truth, because there's going to be a lot more going on before the season even starts.
Thank you, guys.
So much, Tony. Thank you,
All right.
Steve.
Nice to
Take
meet
care,
you, Tony.
Mark.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Take care, Steve.
All right. Then there was one here at the Voice of College Football. So just tremendous input coming in from Steve Day's Michigan podcast, Tony Siracusa, Last Word on College Football, and of course, leading the way for our coverage, our USC guy, Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. The lines are open if you would like to discuss seismic changes in the landscape of college football. And I made the comment a million times at this point last year that I had never seen anything the scope of Texas, Oklahoma to the SEC, and pointed out the number of reasons why those additions to the SEC, which put the Big 12 at that point in a vulnerable state, why they were so much more cataclysmic to the sport and huge in power structure than Nebraska and Colorado and Texas A&M and Missouri and Maryland and Rutgers from the past 12 to 14 years. And now we see something that even exceeds that, because it's basically changing the Pac-12, morphing it into something that's going to be a group of 5 conference, if that. And then there's so much more that could take place that we've just covered over the last 10 or 15 minutes in particular. We got a call coming in from Matthew. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you, Matthew.
So I'm calling in from Lincoln, Nebraska. I know we were talking earlier about, the musical chairs, you don't want to be left out. It got me thinking, is there someone with a chair right now that you think could get left out, like a Vanderbilt or, unfortunately, a team like Nebraska, who hasn't exactly really held up its end of the bargain, joining the Big Ten?
So you got to kind of put pen to paper to do that, to start working out, okay, if they move here and they move here and they gobble up them, and yes, it just, the mathematics of it tells us that it's unlikely that it's going to work out perfect to where everybody who currently has a spot is going to continue to have a spot, because we've already seen 4 schools that don't have a spot get plucked up by the Big 12 because they have played and have market size, and they have traditions, and they have potential because of the market size, meaning Cincinnati, Houston, BYU, and UCF, to get plucked up by a Big 12. This may leave an Arizona or an Arizona State on the sideline eventually, which seems unthinkable, or Oregon State, especially if Oregon leaves, goes to the Big 10, or gets plucked up by the Big 12, and Oregon State doesn't have a partner and they're just kind of left out. This could prove to be a good move or series of moves for the Mountain West. But yes, just the mathematics tell us it's unlikely that there aren't going to be casualties.
And you know, you look at other sports as well. You know, you look at a team like Vanderbilt where, you know, they're not exactly that great or known for their football or basketball, but you know, the SEC is known for their baseball, and that's where they hold their own. So I know we were talking a little bit earlier about how, you know, you could see, you know, those Olympic sports with USC and UCLA kind of staying the same. Do you see that happening where, you know, maybe USC sticks around in basketball in the Pac-12, or do you think they would just go all in?
So we had a couple people comment in the chat that CBS Sports, and I can't confirm this because I didn't find it, that the Pac-12 move or the USC UCLA move is going to be strictly a football and basketball, probably men's and women's scenario. I don't know what the Pac-12 would do in response to that. I don't know. Certainly the Pac-12 is going to be and is upset beyond belief, just like the Big 12 in response to Texas, Oklahoma. So I don't know if they would say, you need to completely leave. If you're leaving, we're not keeping your Olympic sports. We're not doing anything. Or if there's enough leverage there that even though with grit teeth, they would say, okay, well, we're going to keep all these other sports because that maintains all these other sports in our conference. And even though we hate it and we despise you for sticking around in these other sports, we kind of need you at a minimal contribution, if you follow me there. So I don't know if that answers your question there. In terms of Vanderbilt, I don't know at what point the SEC looks at that situation and thinks, okay, they give us all these other sports. Baseball strong. I don't know what they're strong in otherwise, but of course they're a great academic institution, so we can always kind of point at them and they help us in regards to lifting our academic standards and reputation and metrics. But at the same time, the SEC with all these powerhouses all over the place, and then there's this stadium with 24,000 people in every Saturday, and nobody inside. You know, it's in a major American market that's growing by leaps and bounds in Nashville, but nobody cares about Vanderbilt. That if they're not giving us anything and this continues to be a power struggle of football powers, I don't know if the SEC would make that move and say, you know what, Vandy, go run off to the Sun Belt.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be a crazy time. I think that's all I got for you, but I appreciate you having me on.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. All right. What a day, folks, here at the Voice of College Football. And what I had scheduled to do today, if you caught the notification, was at 6 o'clock Eastern time to come on here live, hold a call-in show, and run down my Big Ten scheduling model that was taken from the template of the 3-5-5 model from the ACC. That's what I was going to do. And so that's been blown to smithereens. I can still go through the exercise, but it would be here for all of what? What are we looking at? 2022 and 23 for the Big Ten? I don't think they're going to tear up the conference just to tear it up again 2 years later. So I guess we'll have to look for another exercise to run through this evening. If we do a 6 p.m., we're already at 5. So we've already done, yes, Falconer X. Thank you so much for the super sticker, by the way, Falconer X. But yes, that exercise is out the window. The other one that I went into, and again, this pretty much changes this exercise as well. But it is fascinating to look at previous seasons. Go to 2021. I went through 20, 19, 18, 17. I went all the way back through 15, and I would love to keep going. And I laid out the bowl structure of where the teams would have placed if we were back to the pre-BCS bowl structure. So before a playoff, before a BCS championship game, had those teams, let's take 2021. I don't have it in front of me, but Alabama won the SEC. They would have gone to the Sugar Bowl. Michigan, I almost said Ohio State because it's so automatic. Michigan and Utah won the Big Ten and the Pac-12. They would have gone to the Rose Bowl. Then you had Pitt won the ACC, Orange Bowl. I know Big 12 fans, I'm going against what it was years and years ago, but stay with me. Big 12 winner Baylor goes to the Fiesta Bowl. And then you take the other top 12 and you fill out the New Year's 6 brackets and bowls with the top 12 in the country. And then you play that out on New Year's Day and around New Year's Day and take a +1 game or a Final Four playoff after that. And that would have been one way to secure the bowls, still make them meaningful because everybody's going to watch, because all those are a stepping stone to the playoff, the new 4-team playoff, which would be much more interesting and logical and not selected by a committee, but those would come from the New Year's Day bowl results. So you now revalue, bring value back to the Rose Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the Peach Bowl, the Orange, and whatever else I left out, the Sugar. I was going to go with that. That was going to be tomorrow night's look at a +1 and a +4 year by year and what that would have looked like. I think that's phenomenal discussion right there. But with this situation, now we're going to have to look at what is next in college football. What are these conferences going to look like in a year, 2 years, 5 years? What is it going to look like? So Tony got the report. 2 from the Pac-12, possibly 4. I don't think there's any question. I've got to think that if it's 2, based on what I know and based on what I soaked up from both Tony and Steve, that if those 2 are Stanford and Cal, and then it gets stretches to 4 and the Big Ten explodes up to 18 teams. No, they're already at 16. They explode up to 20, and it's Washington, Oregon, Cal, Stanford. Now we've got a Pac-12 situation that is now, as I block this bot from the chat, we are now down to, if those 4 get plucked up by the Big Ten, we are down to Oregon State, Washington State, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado. My guess in that scenario is that Utah and Colorado are extremely attractive for the Big 12. Maybe the Big 12 goes after Utah and Colorado. Geographically, Colorado's already been in the Big 12. Utah's a strong football power that could be very attractive to the Big 12. I don't know that the Big 12 is going to mess around with the Arizona schools or Washington State, Oregon State. If they can pluck up Utah and Colorado and sit pretty with 16, then they stabilize their situation, improve their football brand with Utah. Tony talked about the lack of continuity between the Big 12 and the Arizona schools and how that would not work or fit. So I'm going to have to think long and hard about what type of content we're going to have to produce over the next several days to counter what's been going on, because one of my best efforts here in the last year was after the Big 12 lost Texas and Oklahoma, was to turn around with a video immediately within the next few days and say, this is who the Big 12 needs to add before they implode, before Iowa State and Texas Tech and some other schools get picked off by the Pac-12 or the Big 10. They need to stabilize the league by adding Houston, BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati. Well, I nailed those 4. So I don't promise to nail the next moves in college football because I don't know, but we'll give it a shot. DeReal MVP. So Boise State and Utah State to the Pac-12. This is the question that I raised there. This means it's going to be an internal war between the common man, I will say, and the football contingent, the sports contingent within these institutions, and the academic and cultural side of it. Now, I don't know what the culture fit is, Boise State, Utah State to the Pac-12, but I know that there's not an academic fit based on everything I've gathered, that those are not academic institutions at the level that the Pac-12. But if these conferences are going to lose out on money and they're going to be downgraded to group of 5 level conferences, maybe they throw their standards out the window. But on the other side, Tony Altimore is a strategist and consultant that we had on our West Virginia show a couple weeks ago. And he's going to be joining me. He has said, Mark, I will come on anytime you'd like. And we have shown his decks, if you guys remember, where he's done all sorts of research regarding fan bases and other metrics around college football. He has said that these endowments, and I've seen this elsewhere, that these endowments for schools like Cal and Stanford are so ridiculously large that they make a football budget look like, change in the piggy bank, and that those relationships aren't going to be compromised for schools of a Pac-12 status to integrate with lesser academic institutions. These bots are going strong today. They must see that we had over 800 on the line. So appreciate everybody being here at the Voice of College Football. And yes, I need to go into the laboratory and work on some things. And they're just going to be much different things that I anticipated earlier, because I was going to start my predictions as well. I was going to map out the entire season and deliver predictions, which, of course, I'm guessing we're still playing a 2022 college football season. And we will deliver predictions here. We usually like to do that, and my nature is to do that the night before the season starts, because I want to wait until the very last second to pull the trigger on my predictions. But we want to get them out early, so I'll review the season, and there's a ton of things going on in my life right now. Good things, not negative things, but generally good things that are pulling at my time. And if you could see behind that, you would see a mess, because there's all sorts of changes going on. So I've got to navigate the professional with the personal, with the logistical, and all the rest of it. But we're going to we will deliver content. Yes, brainstorm. I will be brainstorming. South Florida Noel, appreciate you being here. All right. Thank you, One Scoop John. Appreciate you being here. As One Scoop and others had reminded us today, One Scoop John did, and Eric did earlier. We appreciate you for doing that. We've got a Patreon with a Discord. We've got Discord, which means you can chat college football all the time. This can be your life, 24/7, 365, or whenever you find time. It doesn't have to be when I come on live. You can talk college football whenever you'd like. So basically, absolutely, Tim. My best viewed videos last year, besides a few game recaps like Ohio State, Michigan, of course, were all the Lincoln Riley Oklahoma, Texas, Brian Kelly business. All that stuff gets you guys fired up for sure. And that's what people are searching online. But please go to Patreon. And the link's in the chat right there. Go to Patreon. And that is the link right there to sign up for our Discord. So if you sign up there on Patreon, I will get you your link to Discord. And then you can talk college football with me and a bunch of knuckleheads. All of us are in there talking college football constantly. So please join us. And they also do some after show post shows. How about that? Braden, can USC and UCLA be competitive in the Big Ten West? Yes, of course. Of course, USC is a much better football program traditionally and currently. Currently, I'm not going to say much better than UCLA, but I think everyone's understanding of the football prowess of USC and UCLA. USC, top 5 all-time range. UCLA, more like top 20 all-time. Currently, USC more in the top 15 to 20 range, but with projections that is likely to lift them into the top 5 to 10 range here in the next few years. UCLA, we have yet to see any movement out of UCLA, even though they had a better season last year. But this could improve, in particular, UCLA's recruiting. This could actually improve UCLA's recruiting. All right. Appreciate you all being here. Bruce, thanks so much for joining Discord. Thank you for that. Again, join us on Discord and we can talk college football 24/7, 365. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Lock in on the content. I released a video yesterday looking at the ACC scheduling and what I think of the 3-5-5 no divisions and conference championship game, 1 versus 2 seed. And Cavalier, yes, this is disgusting. And this is my final statement. This is why it's disgusting. College football is a great game on the field. So once September 1st hits, or August 27th hits, and guys start running into each other on the field, much of this will be forgotten by many of us. We will be focused on, oh, wasn't that phenomenal? So-and-so came back in the last 2 minutes and scored 17 points to come back and win 48-45. That was phenomenal. We will be focused on the action on the field. And once, regardless of NIL and transfer portal, guys put on colors that we love and we hate, we're focused and we're engaged and we're interested and we're impassioned. Okay. But off the field, what is college football? What makes it great? What makes it unique? The Big Ten is different than the SEC. That's different than the Big 12. That's different than the ACC. That's different than the Pac-12. They all have different ways they talk, different music genres they like, different foods they eat, different things they value that come from their areas of the country, different terrain, city life, country life, suburban life. And therefore, different cultures. And the clash of those cultures, not in a negative way, but the clash of those cultures, the diversity of those cultures, makes it interesting to see the Big Ten play the SEC, and the Big Ten play the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl, and the ACC against the SEC, and all of these various matchups. But what we are witnessing is that all of that is being sabotaged. The cultural diversity and the fabric of the sport that goes back to the ground roots of the sport, which is ingrained in culture in areas of the country, that is being destroyed when Nebraska's in the same conference as Rutgers? What does Nebraska more than halfway across the country have to do with just outside of New York City? And Columbia, South Carolina with Columbia, Missouri, that's halfway across the country. And Miami, Florida, and Syracuse, New York, or Boston. And on and on and on and on and on. It's been ripped apart. UCF, Central Florida, folks, is going to be playing, even though the games are going to be interesting and the matchups interesting. UCF, located in Orlando, Florida, is going to be playing in the Big 12. Big 12 is supposed to be the Dust Bowl. It's supposed to be the Heartland. Kansas, Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma. That's the Big 12. Not West Virginia and UCF and Cincinnati. Everybody's playing everywhere. It doesn't matter anymore. Thank you, everyone. Cavalier, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate that. And again, one more time here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you next time. And we've got a Miami show lined up for tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And then we also have a call-in show coming up Friday night after our West Virginia show. West Virginia at 8 Eastern on Friday. Then we've got a call-in show at 9 Eastern on Friday night. See you next time. Thank you, D-Rock Irish and others. Appreciate it. Dave, Michigan Rick, all of you, thank you so much. Much appreciated. John, you as well.